Couldn't sleep again? I get it. Some nights the whole world feels too quiet, and your thoughts start wandering places you didn't ask them to go. So let me keep you company for a bit. Settle in, listen to the rain, and let these 5 calm stories pull you somewhere softer. We'll take it slow. Story 1. The neighbor who asked if I heard her too. So, this happened about 8 months ago. I was 26, freshly divorced and looking for somewhere to disappear for a while. Not literally disappear, just somewhere quiet where I could exist without anyone asking how I was doing or giving me that look. You know the one. That tilted head, soft-eyed pity look that makes you want to scream. I found the apartment in early November, a 1940s brick building in a small city about 3 hours from where I'd been living with my ex-husband. Far enough that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. Close enough that I could still pretend I hadn't completely uprooted my life. The building had character, that's what the listing said anyway. What it meant was original hardwood floors that creaked in specific spots, radiators that clanked and hissed like living things, and windows tall enough that the light came in golden in the late afternoon. 16 units total, 4 floors. Mine was 3B, 3rd floor, 1 bedroom, facing the courtyard. The courtyard had a big oak tree that had already dropped most of its leaves by the time I moved in. I remember thinking it looked skeletal. Fitting, I guess. The rent was surprisingly cheap for how nice the place was. I asked the building manager about it during the walkthrough, tried to make it sound like a joke. "What's the catch? Someone die in here?" He laughed, but it was one of those laughs that doesn't quite reach the eyes. Said the previous tenant had just moved out suddenly, left before her lease was up. "People do that sometimes," he said. "Life happens." I didn't push it. I needed the apartment, and I needed it to be affordable. My divorce had left me with enough savings to survive for a few months, but not enough to be picky. I signed the lease that afternoon. Moving in took 2 days. I didn't have much. I'd left most of the furniture with my ex because I couldn't stand looking at it anymore. Every piece reminded me of arguments, of silences that stretched for hours, of the way he'd look at me like I was being dramatic whenever I tried to tell him something was wrong. So I started fresh. Thrift store couch, second-hand bed frame, a desk for my work-from-home setup. I'm a medical transcriptionist, which basically means I spend 8 hours a day with headphones on, typing up doctor's notes. Solitary work. Perfect for someone who wanted to be alone. The first few nights, I slept with the window cracked just enough to hear the rain in the gutters. It had been raining on and off since I'd arrived, that steady November drizzle that makes everything feel muted and soft. I'd lie in bed listening to it mix with the hiss of the radiator, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. The apartment was quiet. The building was quiet. I could breathe here. I met my neighbor on the 4th day, Mrs. Whitmore, apartment 3A, right next door. She was in her early 70s, I guessed, silver hair pinned back neatly, cardigan buttoned to the collar, the kind of woman who probably had hard candies in her purse and opinions about the weather. She caught me in the hallway while I was hauling up a box of kitchen stuff I'd forgotten in my car. "You must be the new tenant," she said, smiling. Her voice was warm but tired, like she hadn't slept well in a while. "Welcome to the building, dear. I'm Edith, 3A. I introduced myself, shifted the box to my hip so I could shake her hand. Her grip was light, almost fragile. Up close, I noticed the shadows under her eyes, purple-gray, deep-set. She looked exhausted in that bone-deep way that sleep doesn't fix. "It's a good building," she said. "Quiet. People keep to themselves mostly. You'll like it here." "That's exactly what I'm looking for," I told her. "Quiet." She nodded slowly, and something flickered across her face, just for a second. A look I couldn't quite read, sad, maybe, or knowing. Then it was gone, replaced by that tired smile. "Well," she said, If you need anything, I'm right next door. These old walls are thin, but the neighbors are respectful. You shouldn't hear much." I thanked her, and she shuffled back to her apartment. I remember standing there for a moment after her door clicked shut, feeling oddly unsettled. Not scared exactly, just aware of something I couldn't name. I shook it off. New place, new people, new anxieties. That's all it was. The next week passed without incident. I unpacked, set up my desk by the window, fell into a routine. Work during the day, long walks in the evening when the rain let up, early nights with a book or a show I'd been meaning to watch. The building was exactly as quiet as promised. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps in the hallway, a door closing somewhere below, the distant murmur of a television through the floor. Normal sounds, comforting even. I started sleeping better than I had in years. The radiator in my bedroom would kick on around midnight, filling the room with that gentle, rhythmic clanking, and I'd drift off listening to it mixed with the rain outside. I felt safe. I felt like I'd made the right choice. That lasted about 2 weeks. The third night of my third week there, I woke up at 2 a.m. Not slowly, the way you usually surface from sleep, but suddenly, like something had yanked me awake. I lay there in the dark, heart beating faster than it should, trying to figure out what had woken me. Then I heard it, a woman crying, soft, muffled, somewhere in the walls. At first, I told myself it was just the pipes. Old buildings make strange sounds, especially at night. The radiator had gone quiet, which was unusual, and in the silence, every small noise seemed amplified. It was probably just metal contracting, water moving through old plumbing. Nothing to worry about. But it didn't sound like pipes. It sounded like someone sobbing, quiet, hopeless, the kind of crying you do when you don't think anyone can hear you. I pulled the blanket tighter and waited. After a few minutes, it stopped. The radiator clanked back to life. The rain picked up against the window, and eventually I convinced myself I'd imagined it. I was stressed. I was in a new place. I was still adjusting. That's all. I fell back asleep, telling myself it was nothing. The next night, it happened again. Same time, 2 a.m., almost to the minute. I woke with that same sudden jolt, like my body knew something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing, and waited. There it was, the crying, soft and muffled, rising and falling in waves. A woman's voice, unmistakably human, somewhere behind the walls. This time, I got up. I moved slowly through the dark apartment, pressing my ear to different walls, trying to locate the source. The living room, nothing. The bathroom, nothing. But when I stepped into the bedroom and stood near the wall, my bed was pushed against. The crying was louder, clearer. I could almost make out the rhythm of it, the way the sobs caught and stuttered like whoever was making them couldn't catch their breath. I pressed my palm flat against the wall. The plaster was cold, colder than it should have been. The radiator had gone silent again. I noticed that now, the absence of its usual clanking. The only sounds were the crying and the rain tapping against the window, soft and steady. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, listening. Then, just like before, it stopped. Not faded, stopped. Like someone had flipped a switch. The radiator kicked back on with a loud clank that made me flinch, and suddenly the room felt normal again. Warm, quiet. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat on my couch with every light on, telling myself there had to be an explanation. Sound travels strangely in old buildings. Maybe someone on another floor had their TV on, some late-night movie with a crying scene. Maybe one of my neighbors was going through something personal and I was hearing it through the vents. It wasn't my business either way. I wasn't going to be that person who knocked on doors at 2 a.m., asking if everyone was okay. But I couldn't shake the cold. The way the wall had felt under my hand, like touching something dead. A few days passed. I threw myself into work, kept my headphones on for hours at a time, tried not to think about it. The crying didn't come back. or if it did, I slept through it. I started to believe I'd overreacted. Stress does strange things to your mind. I knew that better than anyone. Then I ran into Mrs. Whitmore again. It was a Sunday afternoon. I'd gone down to the basement to do laundry. The building had a small shared room with 2 washers and 2 dryers, usually empty. Mrs. Whitmore was already there when I arrived, folding clothes at the narrow table against the wall. She looked worse than the last time I'd seen her, thinner somehow. The shadows under her eyes had deepened to bruises, and her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the fabric of a blouse. "Hi, Mrs. Whitmore," I said, loading my clothes into the washer. "How are you?" She didn't answer right away. I glanced over and found her watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Intense, almost searching. "You can call me Edith, dear," she said finally. Her voice was quieter than before, rougher. "How are you settling in? Everything all right with the apartment?" "Yeah, it's great. Really quiet." She nodded slowly. Then she set down the blouse she'd been folding and turned to face me fully. The fluorescent light above us flickered once, casting her face in brief shadow. "Have you heard her yet?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. I felt the ripples move through me, confusion, then recognition, then something colder. "What?" "The woman," Mrs. Whitmore said. Her eyes never left mine. Crying. Usually around 2 in the morning. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. My heart had started beating faster, that familiar panic rising in my chest. She knew. She'd heard it too. I wasn't imagining things. Before I could say anything, the door to the laundry room swung open. A man I didn't recognize, 40s, balding, apartment 2C according to the mail I'd seen him collect, stepped in with a basket of clothes. He nodded at us, perfectly casual, and Mrs. Whitmore's expression changed instantly. The intensity vanished, replaced by that tired, polite smile. "Well," she said, turning back to her folding, "I should finish up here. Nice chatting with you, dear." "Wait. Mrs. Whitmore, what did you—" "Edith," she corrected gently, and I'm sure it was nothing. Old buildings make all sorts of sounds. Have a good afternoon. She gathered her laundry basket and left before I could stop her. The man from 2C loaded his clothes into the other washer, humming tunelessly to himself, completely unaware that my entire reality had just shifted. I tried to catch Mrs. Whitmore again over the next few days. I knocked on her door twice, but she didn't answer, though I could hear movement inside, the shuffle of footsteps, the creak of floorboards. I saw her once in the hallway, but she just smiled and said she was running late for a doctor's appointment, couldn't chat. Her eyes didn't meet mine. She knew something, and she didn't want to talk about it. The crying came back. Every night now, 2 a.m., like clockwork. I started setting an alarm for 1:45 just so I could be awake when it started, so the sudden jolt wouldn't catch me off guard. I'd lie in bed in the dark, watching the red numbers on my phone, waiting. 158, 159, 200. Silence first. The radiator would go quiet, always right before. Then the cold would creep into the room, slow and heavy, and then, there it was, the crying. Soft, desperate, hopeless. Sometimes it lasted 5 minutes, sometimes 20. I started timing it, writing it down in the Notes app on my phone, like that would somehow make it make sense. One night, I pressed my ear directly against the wall, right where the sound seemed loudest. The crying was so close, so clear. I could hear the individual breaths between sobs, the way the voice hitched and broke. I held my breath, listening, and then it stopped. Complete silence. Not even the rain outside, though I knew it was still falling. Just nothing. Then a single knock from inside the wall, right where my ear was pressed. I stumbled backward so fast I nearly fell. My hand flew to my mouth to stop myself from screaming. I stood there in the middle of my bedroom, shaking, staring at the wall, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The radiator clanked back on. The rain resumed its soft patter. After a long moment, I grabbed my pillow and blanket and went to sleep on the couch. I didn't go back into the bedroom until the sun was fully up. The next morning, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Behind my bed, low on the wall near the baseboard, there was a thin crack in the plaster. It was maybe 6 inches long, jagged, like something had tried to push through from the other side. The paint around it was old, yellowed. This wasn't new damage, but I could have sworn it wasn't there when I moved in. I ran my finger along it. The plaster was cold. I told myself it was just settling. Old buildings shift, foundations move, cracks appear. It didn't mean anything, but I moved my bed to the other side of the room anyway. 3 weeks into living there, I woke up to the crying again. But this time was different. It was louder, not muffled anymore, not distant. It sounded like someone was in the room with me. I sat up in bed, heart slamming against my ribs, and fumbled for my phone. The screen lit up. 2:03 a.m. The radiator was dead silent. The room was so cold I could see my breath, little white clouds forming in front of my face with each shallow exhale. The crying was coming from the wall. The wall I'd moved my bed away from. Even from across the room, I could hear it clearly now. A woman sobbing, gasping for air between cries, the sound raw and broken and desperate. It wasn't coming through the wall. It was coming from inside it. I couldn't move. I sat there frozen, blanket clutched in my fists, staring at that section of wall where the crack was. The crack I'd tried to convince myself was nothing. In the dim glow from my phone, I could see it. And I swear it looked longer than before. Wider. Like something was slowly forcing it open from the other side. The crying stopped. The silence was worse. It pressed against my ears, thick and absolute. No rain, no radiator, no building sounds. Just nothing. I held my breath, waiting, every muscle in my body wound tight. Then I heard it. My name, whispered, soft and clear and unmistakable, coming from the crack in the wall. I was out of bed before I knew I was moving. I hit every light switch I could find, bedroom, hallway, living room, kitchen, until the entire apartment was blazing bright. I pressed myself against the far wall of the living room, as far from the bedroom as I could get, and stood there shaking. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I felt like I was going to throw up. It knew my name, whatever was in that wall, whatever was crying. It knew who I was. I didn't go back into the bedroom. I sat on the couch with my back against the wall, watching the hallway that led to the bedroom door until the sun came up. The crying didn't come back, but I could still hear the echo of my name, that soft whisper playing on repeat in my head. When morning finally came, gray and cold and drizzly, I made a decision. I needed answers. I couldn't keep pretending this wasn't happening, couldn't keep telling myself I was stressed or imagining things. Mrs. Whitmore knew something. She'd asked me about the crying. She'd heard it too. I knocked on her door at 8 a.m. No answer. I knocked again, harder. Nothing. I pressed my ear to the door and heard only silence. No footsteps, no TV, no movement at all. I tried again at noon, then at 4 p.m. Each time, nothing. By evening, I was starting to panic. Something was wrong. Mrs. Whitmore had been avoiding me, sure, but she'd always been in there. I'd heard her moving around, heard the creak of her floors through the thin walls. Now there was nothing, like her apartment was empty. I was pacing the hallway, trying to decide whether to call someone, the building manager maybe, or the police, when the door across the hall opened. Apartment 3C. A man stepped out, older, maybe late 60s, with a weathered face and kind eyes. I'd seen him in passing, but we'd never spoken. He looked at me standing there, clearly distressed, and frowned. "You all right?" "I'm looking for Mrs. Whitmore," I said. "Edith, 3A. Have you seen her?" His expression shifted. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or resignation. "Didn't you hear? Ambulance came for her last night, around 3 in the morning." My stomach dropped. "What? Is she okay?" "Don't know the details, but she didn't look good when they wheeled her out. Poor thing." He shook his head slowly. "Can't say I'm surprised, though. She hasn't been the same since she moved into that apartment." I stared at him. "What do you mean? How long has she lived here?" 8 months, maybe 9. She was perfectly healthy when she arrived, you know. Spry for her age, always smiling, always chatting in the hallways. But after a few weeks in 3A, he trailed off, glancing at her door. Something changed. She stopped sleeping, started looking like she'd aged 10 years overnight. I asked her about it once, but she wouldn't talk, just said the apartment wasn't what she expected. The hallway felt colder. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to steady my breathing. "Did she ever mention anything specific?" I asked. "Anything about sounds at night?" He studied me for a long moment. His eyes were careful, measuring. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "You've heard her too, haven't you? The woman." I couldn't answer. My throat had closed up. He nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something he already knew. "Edith asked me the same thing, about a month after she moved in. Wanted to know if I'd ever heard crying in the walls. I told her no, and I haven't, not once. Whatever it is, it's not in my apartment." He paused. "But Edith heard it, every night," she said. 2 in the morning, like clockwork. She was the last one to ask about her, you know." "The last one? There were others?" "There are always others." He glanced down the hall, toward the stairwell, like he was making sure we were alone. "That apartment, 3A, people don't stay long, a year at most, usually less. They move in fine, and then after a while, they start looking like Edith did, tired, haunted. They ask questions, and then they leave, or they're carried out." He met my eyes again. "You're in 3B, aren't you?" I nodded. "The crying comes from the wall between 3A and 3B. Always has, from what I understand. Started back in the 80s after..." He stopped himself. "You should talk to the building manager. Ask him about the history. Tell him you want the truth, not the usual runaround." "What happened in the 80s?" But he was already stepping back into his apartment. "I've said enough. You seem like a nice girl. Just be careful. And if you're smart, you'll start looking for another place to live." The door closed. I stood alone in the hallway, the silence pressing in around me. Behind me, I could hear the rain starting up again, tapping against the window at the end of the corridor. I looked at Mrs. Whitmore's door, then at my own. Then I grabbed my coat and headed downstairs to find the building manager. The management office was a cramped room on the first floor, tucked behind the mailboxes. I'd only been in there once, the day I signed my lease. The manager, a heavy-set man named Dennis, with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow and tired eyes, was sitting behind a cluttered desk when I walked in. He looked up, and something in his expression shifted when he saw me. Recognition, maybe dread. "Miss from 3B, he said. Not a question. "What can I help you with?" I didn't sit down. I stood in front of his desk, still wearing my coat, rain dripping from my hair onto the worn carpet. "I want to know what happened in my apartment. The truth, not the runaround." He leaned back in his chair. For a long moment, he just looked at me, and I could see him weighing his options. Lie and hope I'd drop it. Tell me just enough to make me go away. Or finally, after who knows how many tenants, tell the whole story. "The previous tenant," he started. "She tell you anything before she left?" "Mrs. Whitmore is in the hospital. She collapsed last night." Something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or exhaustion. He ran a hand over his jaw and sighed. "Sit down," he said. "This is going to take a minute." I sat. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a manila folder, old and soft at the edges from years of handling. He didn't open it, just set it on the desk between us like he needed to see it there to make himself talk. In 1987, a woman named Evelyn Marsh lived in apartment 3B. Your apartment. She was in her early 60s, lived alone, kept to herself. No family nearby, no close friends in the building. Nice enough lady, from what I've heard, but private. The kind of person who could go days without anyone noticing. He paused. Outside, I could hear the rain intensifying, drumming against the small window behind his desk. One night in November 14th, 1987, Evelyn had a stroke. Middle of the night, around 2 in the morning. She was in her bedroom when it happened. My stomach tightened. I already knew where this was going, but I needed to hear it. Back then, the layout of the apartments was a little different. There was a small closet built into the wall between 3A and 3B, accessed from the 3B side. Storage space, basically. When Evelyn had her stroke, she was disoriented, confused. She couldn't get to the phone, couldn't get to the front door. She ended up in that closet somehow. Maybe she was looking for something. Maybe she thought it was the way out. We'll never know. He finally opened the folder. Inside, I caught a glimpse of old photographs, yellowed newspaper clippings, handwritten notes. He didn't show them to me. Just looked at them himself, like he was reminding himself of the details. She died in that closet, alone, crying for help. His voice was flat now, reciting facts he'd clearly recited before. No one heard her, or if they did, they didn't realize what they were hearing. It took 3 weeks before anyone found her. The smell, eventually. That's what made someone call. 3 weeks. I thought of the crying I'd heard every night, that desperate, broken sobbing. 3 weeks of dying in the dark, hoping someone would come. And no one did. After that, Dennis continued, the building owners did some renovations, sealed up the closet, expanded the bedroom in 3B, tried to make people forget, but people started hearing things. The tenants in 3A mostly, that's the wall the closet shared. Sometimes 3B crying at night, always around 2 in the morning, always a woman. Why didn't you tell me this before I moved in? He had the decency to look ashamed. Would you have signed the lease if I had? I didn't answer. We both knew I probably would have. I was desperate and broke and looking for somewhere to hide. I would have convinced myself it was just a story. Most people don't hear anything, he said. Or if they do, they convince themselves it's nothing. Pipes, neighbors, whatever. It's the ones who really listen, who can't ignore it. They're the ones who end up like your neighbor. He closed the folder. I'm sorry, I should have warned you. But I've learned that warning people doesn't usually help. They either don't believe you, or they move in anyway and it happens regardless. I stood up. My legs felt unsteady, but I made myself move toward the door. Wait, Dennis said. What are you going to do? I didn't answer. I wasn't sure myself. I went back to my apartment, walked straight into the bedroom. The rain was coming down hard now, rattling against the window, and the room was cold, colder than it should have been, even with the radiator silent. I looked at the wall where the closet used to be. The crack in the plaster seemed larger, more defined, like the outline of a door that someone had tried to erase. Evelyn died right there, behind that wall, crying for help that never came. I thought about Mrs. Whitmore, wasting away in the apartment next door, listening to that crying every night until it broke her. I thought about all the tenants before her, the ones who left or were carried out. I thought about myself. How I'd spent my whole marriage being told I was imagining things, being made to doubt my own perceptions, being taught that my instincts were wrong. I wasn't going to do that anymore. I wasn't going to run. I sat down on the edge of my bed, facing the wall. The room was freezing now, my breath visible in the gray light. The radiator stayed silent. The rain drummed on. And then, because I didn't know what else to do, I spoke. "Evelyn." My voice came out thin, shaky. I swallowed and tried again. "Evelyn, I hear you. I know what happened to you, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry no one came. I'm sorry you were alone." The room went colder. So cold it hurt to breathe. The crack in the wall seemed to shudder, or maybe that was just my eyes watering from the chill. And then the crying started. Loud, so loud, right there, right in front of me, like she was standing inches away, desperate, anguished, the sound of someone who had given up hope but couldn't stop trying anyway. It filled the room, filled my chest, rattled in my bones. I was crying too. I didn't realize it until I tasted salt on my lips. "I hear you," I said again, louder this time. "I hear you, Evelyn. You're not alone anymore." The crying rose to a peak, a raw, broken wail that seemed to shake the walls, and then slowly, it began to fade. Not stop. Fade. Like someone walking away down a long hallway, getting further and further until it was just an echo, then a whisper, then nothing. The room warmed. Slowly at first, then all at once. The radiator clanked back to life. The rain softened to a gentle patter against the glass. I sat there for a long time, shaking, tears streaming down my face. But I wasn't scared anymore. For the first time since I'd moved in, the apartment felt empty, really, truly empty, and somehow that felt like enough. I didn't sleep in the bedroom that night, not because I was afraid, I wasn't, not really, but because I needed time to process what had happened. I lay on the couch with a blanket pulled up to my chin, listening to the rain and the steady rhythm of the radiator, and I waited for the crying to come back. It didn't. 2 a.m. came and went. I watched the numbers change on my phone, 201, 202, 203, and the apartment stayed silent, warm, still. For the first time in weeks, there was no cold creeping through the walls, no muffled sobs pulling me from sleep. Just the rain, soft and steady, and the ordinary sounds of an old building settling into the night. I finally drifted off around 4 a.m. When I woke up, pale winter sunlight was streaming through the windows, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Rested, genuinely rested. The first thing I did that morning was call the hospital. It took some convincing. I wasn't family after all. But eventually a nurse confirmed that Edith Whitmore was stable and accepting visitors. I stopped at a grocery store on the way and bought a small bouquet of flowers, the kind with too much baby's breath and not enough color. It felt inadequate, but I didn't know what else to bring. Mrs. Whitmore was in a private room on the 3rd floor. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She was sitting up in bed, looking out the window at the gray sky, and she looked different. Not healthy exactly. She was still thin, still pale, still bearing the marks of whatever had been draining her for months. But the exhaustion in her face had lifted. The shadows under her eyes seemed lighter. She looked like someone who had finally been allowed to sleep. She turned when she heard me come in, and her expression shifted. Surprise first, then something softer. Recognition. "It's you," she said. "The girl from 3B. I brought you flowers." I set them on the bedside table, feeling awkward. "I'm sorry they're not much. They're lovely." She studied my face for a long moment, and I saw her eyes searching for something. "You look different, less tired." "So do you." She smiled at that. A real smile, not the strained, polite one I'd seen in the hallways. Then her expression grew serious. "You hurt her," she said. It wasn't a question. The woman in the walls. Evelyn. Her name was Evelyn. Mrs. Whitmore's eyes widened. For a moment, she just stared at me, and I could see the weight of all those sleepless nights, all those desperate hours listening to that crying, pressing down on her. You found out what happened to her? I nodded. I told her everything, the conversation with Dennis, the story of the sealed closet, the night I'd spoken to Evelyn out loud. Mrs. Whitmore listened without interrupting, her hands folded in her lap, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. When I finished, she reached out and took my hand. Her grip was stronger than I expected. I tried, she whispered. I tried so many times to figure out what she wanted. I thought maybe if I just listened long enough, she'd stop. But she never did. It just kept getting worse every night, and I couldn't do anything. Her voice broke. I felt so helpless. You weren't helpless. You heard her. That mattered. But you did something. She squeezed my hand tighter. You actually heard her. You gave her what she needed. I didn't know what to say to that. I'd just talked to a wall, spoken words into empty air, hoped that somehow it would be enough. I hadn't done anything special. I just refused to keep pretending I couldn't hear her. Maybe that was the point. I visited Mrs. Whitmore twice more before she was discharged. She didn't go back to the apartment. Her daughter came from out of state and helped her move to an assisted living facility closer to family. The last time I saw her, she hugged me in the hospital lobby and told me I was braver than I knew. I'm not sure about that, but I kept the compliment anyway. That was 8 months ago. I still live in apartment 3B. I know that probably sounds crazy after everything that happened, but the truth is, I don't want to leave. The apartment is different now, quieter in a way that feels peaceful instead of heavy. The crack in the bedroom wall is still there, but it hasn't grown. If anything, it looks smaller, older, like a scar that's finally starting to heal. I never hear the crying anymore, not once in all these months. The radiator clanks and hisses like it always did. The rain patters against the windows on stormy nights, and the building makes its usual old building sounds. But Evelyn is gone, or maybe not gone, maybe just at rest. I like to think she finally got what she needed. Someone to hear her, someone to acknowledge that she existed, that she suffered, that she deserved better than dying alone in the dark. I think about her sometimes, especially on November 14th, the anniversary of her death. Last year, I lit a candle and set it on the windowsill, and I sat in the bedroom for an hour, just being present, just in case she needed to know someone remembered. The room stayed warm the whole time. There's one more thing. It started a few weeks after the crying stopped, and it still happens sometimes. Late at night, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I'll feel something brush against my hair, soft and light, like fingertips, gentle, almost tender. The first time it happened, I flinched awake, heart pounding. But there was nothing there. Just the quiet apartment, the rain outside, the ordinary darkness. It happened again a few nights later, and again after that. And eventually, I stopped being afraid of it. I think it's her. I think it's Evelyn, saying thank you in the only way she can. I don't flinch anymore when I feel it. I just close my eyes and let it happen. Let her gentle touch remind me that some connections don't end just because one person is gone. She heard me when I called out to her, and now, in her own way, she's letting me know she's still listening. To this day, I still check the crack in the wall sometimes, just to make sure it's not growing. It never is. To this day, I still think about Mrs. Whitmore and all the tenants who came before her, and how close I came to ending up the same way. And to this day, I still believe that the scariest thing about Evelyn's story wasn't the haunting. It was that she died alone, crying for help, and no one came. All she ever wanted was to be heard. I'm just glad I finally listened. Story 2. My fitness tracker logged steps while I slept. I need to tell you about the night I realized I wasn't alone in my house. It started with something stupid, something so mundane that I almost didn't notice it at all. My fitness tracker, one of those basic ones that counts steps and monitors your heart rate, logged 3,247 steps between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. on a Tuesday night. The problem was, I'd been asleep, dead asleep. I hadn't gotten up to use the bathroom, hadn't wandered to the kitchen for water, hadn't done anything except lie in my bed and dream about nothing I could remember. I noticed it the next morning while I was brushing my teeth. I always check my stats first thing. It's a habit, part of my routine. Steps from yesterday, hours slept, resting heart rate. That morning, the sleep data showed a weird spike in the middle of the night. Active minutes logged, steps counted. My heart rate elevated for nearly 2 hours. I figured it was a glitch. These things malfunction all the time, right? Sensors get confused, software bugs out, data gets corrupted. I'd had the tracker for about a year, and it had always been a little finicky. Sometimes it wouldn't sync properly. Sometimes it counted arm movements as steps when I was just gesturing while talking. Technology isn't perfect. I went to work, forgot about it, came home, made dinner, went to bed. The next morning, 2,891 steps, between 1:30 a.m. and 3:45 a.m. I stared at the screen for a long time. The app showed a neat little graph of my activity, a flat line through most of the night, and then this sudden mountain of movement in the dead hours. My heart rate had climbed from its usual sleeping range of 58 to 62, up to 85, sometimes 90, like I'd been walking, actually walking. I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to think. Was I sleepwalking? I'd never done that before, not even as a kid. My mom used to joke that I slept like the dead. Once I was out, nothing could wake me. Thunderstorms, car alarms, the smoke detector that one time I burned popcorn at 2 a.m. in college. I slept through everything. But the data was right there on the screen. Steps, heart rate, movement. I should probably give you some context about my living situation. I'm 28. I work in IT support for a mid-sized company, and I live alone in a house I inherited from my grandmother 2 years ago. It's a modest place, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a basement I mostly use for storage, and an attic I never go into because the ladder is rickety and I'm not entirely convinced the floor up there would hold my weight. The house is old, built in the 1960s, and it has all the quirks you'd expect. Creaky floors, drafty windows, a furnace that sounds like it's dying every time it kicks on. I loved my grandmother, and I love the house. But living alone in a place meant for a family can feel isolating sometimes. The empty bedrooms, the quiet that settles in after dark, the way sounds seem to carry differently when there's no one else to hear them. After the second night of phantom steps, I decided to test a theory. Before bed, I took off the fitness tracker and left it on my nightstand. If it logged steps while sitting motionless on a flat surface, I'd know it was a hardware issue. Simple enough. I woke up the next morning, checked the tracker, 0 steps overnight. My stomach did something uncomfortable. I put the tracker back on, wore it to work, tried not to think about what that meant. Because if the tracker only logged steps when it was on my wrist, if it needed to be attached to my body to register movement, then either I was sleepwalking or what? What else could it be? That night, I wore the tracker to bed again. But this time, I set up my phone to record audio. I propped it on my nightstand, opened a voice memo app, and hit record. If I was getting up and walking around, I'd hear it. Footsteps on the hardwood, the creak of the bedroom door, something. I fell asleep around 11. The rain had started up again. We'd had a wet spring, storms rolling through every few days, and the sound of it on the roof usually helped me drift off. I remember lying there listening to it, thinking about how my grandmother used to say rain was good for sleeping. Nature's white noise, she called it. I woke up at 6:15 to my alarm, groggy, disoriented, the way you feel after a night of deep, dreamless sleep. I reached for my phone and checked the tracker first. 4,112 steps, between midnight and 3:30 a.m. My hands were shaking as I opened the voice memo app. The recording was 3.5 hours long. I'd stopped it in my sleep at some point, apparently. I scrubbed through it, listening to the static hiss of silence, the occasional creak of the house settling, the rain against the windows. And then, around the 1:47 mark, I heard it. Footsteps. Not loud, not hurried, just footsteps. Slow and measured, moving across what sounded like the hardwood floor of the hallway outside my bedroom. They went one direction, paused, then came back, then stopped. I sat frozen in my bed, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the recording of my own house in the middle of the night. The footsteps started again, pacing, back and forth, the rhythm almost meditative, like someone walking while they thought, like someone who had all the time in the world. The recording went on for almost 40 minutes. Footsteps, silence, footsteps, silence. And through all of it, I could hear myself breathing, slow and deep, still asleep, completely unaware that something was walking through my house while I dreamed. The footsteps stopped around the 2:25 mark. The rest of the recording was silence until it cut off abruptly, mid-static. I didn't go to work that day. I sat in my kitchen with every light in the house turned on, listening to that recording over and over, trying to convince myself there was an explanation. A rational, logical explanation that didn't involve someone being in my house while I slept. I couldn't find one. The first thing I did was search the house. Every room, every closet, every space large enough to hide a person. I started in the basement, which I hated. It was unfinished, all concrete walls and exposed pipes, with a single bare bulb that cast more shadows than light. I checked behind the water heater, inside the old wardrobe my grandmother had used for storage, in the crawl space beneath the stairs where she used to keep canning supplies. Nothing. Dust and cobwebs, and the smell of damp concrete, but nothing else. The main floor was easier. Living room, kitchen, dining room, the small half-bath by the back door. I looked in cabinets, behind furniture, inside the coat closet by the front entrance. I found a dead mouse behind the refrigerator that made me gag, but no sign of another person. The bedrooms took longer. My room first, then the guest room my grandmother had kept obsessively tidy, then the smallest bedroom she'd used as a sewing room. Closets, under beds, behind doors. I even checked inside the old cedar chest at the foot of the guest bed, feeling ridiculous as I lifted the heavy lid and found nothing but quilts that smelled like lavender and mothballs. That left the attic. I stood at the bottom of the pull-down ladder for a long time, staring up at the rectangular outline of the hatch in the hallway ceiling. I hadn't been up there since I'd moved in. My grandmother had used it for holiday decorations and old photo albums, things I'd never gotten around to sorting through. The ladder was original to the house, wooden, creaky, the kind of thing you'd see in a horror movie right before something terrible happened. I told myself I was being paranoid. The attic was sealed, the hatch was heavy, and the ladder made noise when you pulled it down. I would have heard someone using it. I would have woken up. But I had to check. The ladder groaned under my weight as I climbed. The hatch stuck at first, swollen from humidity, and I had to shove it hard with my shoulder to get it open. Stale air rushed down, that particular attic smell of old insulation and forgotten things. I pulled myself up through the opening and fumbled for the light switch I remembered being somewhere near the entrance. The bulb flickered on, dim and yellow. The attic was exactly as I remembered it. Low ceiling, exposed rafters, boxes stacked along the walls, a dressmaker's dummy in the corner that made my heart lurch before I realized what it was. Dust lay thick on everything, undisturbed except for the footprints leading from the hatch to the far corner of the space. Footprints, in the dust, clear as anything. I stopped breathing. The footprints weren't mine. I hadn't been up here. They were smaller than mine would be, narrow, like someone wearing thin-soled shoes or maybe no shoes at all. They led from the hatch opening, wove between the boxes, and disappeared behind a stack of old luggage near the eaves. I didn't follow them. I couldn't make myself move. I just stood there at the top of the ladder, staring at those prints in the dust, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Someone had been up here. Recently. Someone had climbed into my attic and walked to that far corner and done... what? The rational part of my brain tried to intervene. Maybe they were old footprints. Maybe I'd come up here and forgotten. Maybe my grandmother had come up here before she died and I just hadn't noticed the prints before now. But the dust around them was settled, untouched. If those prints had been there for 2 years, wouldn't the dust have started to fill them in? Wouldn't there be some sign of age? I backed down the ladder so fast I nearly fell. I shoved the hatch closed, slid the ladder back up into the ceiling, and stood in the hallway with my hands pressed against the wood, like I could keep whatever was up there from coming down. Nothing happened. The house was silent except for the rain starting up again outside, pattering against the windows in that steady rhythm I usually found comforting. Now it just sounded like static, like interference, like something trying to mask other sounds. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? And tell them what? That my fitness tracker logged steps and I found footprints in my attic? They'd think I was crazy. They'd tell me to change my locks and get a security system and stop watching scary movies before bed. But I wasn't crazy. I knew what I'd heard on that recording. I knew what I'd seen in the dust. That night, I didn't sleep in the bedroom. I stayed on the couch in the living room with every light on, a kitchen knife on the coffee table, and my phone in my hand, ready to dial 911. The rain intensified around midnight, hammering against the roof, and I lay there listening to it, straining to hear anything underneath. Footsteps, creaking floorboards, the groan of the attic ladder being pulled down. I must have dozed off around 3 a.m. because I woke with a start to gray morning light and the sound of birds outside. The knife was still on the table. My phone showed no missed calls, no alerts. I checked the fitness tracker on my wrist, my hands trembling. 1,847 steps, between 3:15 a.m. and 5 a.m. I'd been asleep on the couch. I hadn't moved. I was sure of it. But something had. I pulled up the step data, looking at the detailed breakdown. The app showed a pattern, short bursts of movement, followed by periods of stillness. Walking, then stopping. Walking, then stopping. Like someone pacing. Like someone checking on something. Or checking on someone. I scrolled down to the heart rate data and felt my stomach drop. During those periods of movement, my heart rate had spiked to over 100. At one point, it hit 118. But I hadn't been anxious. I'd been asleep, dreaming of nothing, completely unaware. Unless I hadn't been wearing the tracker. The thought hit me like cold water. What if someone had taken it off my wrist while I slept? What if someone had worn it, walked around my house, and then put it back on me before morning? I looked at the fitness tracker, looked at the band, the clasp, the way it sat against my skin. It was snug, the same position I always wore it. But was it exactly the same? Would I even be able to tell? I needed to know for certain. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. That afternoon, I drove to the electronics store and bought 3 things: a motion-activated security camera, a door wedge alarm, and a carbon monoxide detector. Because that was the other possibility, wasn't it? CO poisoning could cause confusion, memory loss, hallucinations. Maybe there was a leak somewhere in the house. Maybe I was sleepwalking and just didn't remember. Maybe there was an explanation that didn't involve someone hiding in my attic, wearing my fitness tracker in the dark while I slept. I installed everything that evening. Camera pointed at my bedroom door. Door wedge alarm jammed under the door so it would shriek if anyone tried to open it. CO detector plugged into the outlet by my bed. I told myself I'd have answers by morning. I had no idea how much I didn't want to know. The CO detector showed normal levels all night. Green light, steady and reassuring, no alarm, no danger. Whatever was happening to me, it wasn't carbon monoxide. I almost wished it had been. I woke up at 6 a.m. to my alarm, heart already racing before I even opened my eyes. The door wedge was still in place. The bedroom door was closed. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it. For one brief, beautiful moment, I let myself believe that maybe last night had been different. Maybe whatever had been happening had stopped. Then I checked my fitness tracker. 5,847 steps. Between 11:30 p.m. and 4:15 a.m. Nearly 5 hours of movement. More than any night before. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the camera app on my phone. The security camera I'd set up was Wi-Fi enabled, stored footage to the cloud, let me review it remotely. I'd positioned it on my dresser, aimed at the bedroom door. If anyone had come in, or if I had gone out, I would see it. The footage started at 10:47 p.m. when I turned the camera on before bed. I watched myself climb under the covers, adjust my pillow, reach over to turn off the lamp. The room went dark, but the camera had night vision. Everything rendered in that eerie green-gray glow that makes ordinary spaces look alien. I scrubbed forward. 11 p.m. 11:30. Midnight. I was motionless in bed, just a shape under the blankets, occasionally shifting slightly but never getting up. The door stayed closed. The door wedge stayed in place. Nothing moved. 12:30 a.m. 1 a.m. Still nothing. At 1:47 a.m. I sat up. I watched myself on the screen, watched my body push back the covers and swing my legs over the side of the bed. My movements were strange, smooth but mechanical, like a marionette being operated by someone who almost knew how bodies worked, but not quite. I stood up, walked to the door, bent down and removed the door wedge, setting it carefully aside. Then I opened the door and walked out of frame. I wasn't awake. I could tell from the footage. My eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them. No awareness, no consciousness. I was sleepwalking. After 28 years of sleeping like the dead, I was suddenly getting up in the middle of the night and wandering through my house. But that didn't explain the footprints in the attic. Footprints that were smaller than mine. Footprints I hadn't made. I kept watching. For almost 2 hours, the footage showed nothing but my empty bedroom. The bed with its rumpled sheets. The door hanging open to the dark hallway beyond. I didn't come back into frame until 3:52 a.m. when I watched myself walk back into the room, replace the door wedge, climb into bed, and pull the covers up like nothing had happened. My movements were still wrong, still puppet-like, and just before I lay down, the camera caught something that made my blood turn to ice. I looked directly into the lens, not accidentally, not in passing. I stopped at the foot of the bed, turned my head toward the camera and stared. For almost 30 seconds, I stood there looking into the camera with eyes that were open but empty, a face that was mine but somehow not. And then I smiled. I don't smile like that. I've never smiled like that. It was too wide, too deliberate, stretched across my face like something wearing my skin had seen humans smile and was trying to replicate it from memory. I dropped my phone, actually dropped it, fumbled it right out of my hands, and it clattered to the floor while I sat there on the edge of my bed trying to remember how to breathe. That wasn't me. That thing on the camera, that smiling puppet version of myself, that wasn't me. But it was my body, my face, my room. I called in sick to work again. Then I called my mother. She answered on the third ring, voice warm and concerned, the way it always was when I called unexpectedly. "Honey, everything okay?" I didn't know how to explain. I didn't know where to start. So I just asked the question that had been gnawing at me since I'd first noticed the steps. "Mom, did I ever sleepwalk as a kid? Even once?" A pause. Sleepwalk? No, never. You were always such a sound sleeper. Why? What about Grandma? Did she ever mention anything about the house? Anything strange? The pause was longer this time. When my mother spoke again, her voice had changed. Careful now. Measured. Why are you asking about the house? I've just been having trouble sleeping. Weird dreams. I thought maybe... Have you been in the attic? The question hit me like a slap. What? The attic. Have you been up there? Yes. Yesterday. Why? My mother was quiet for so long, I thought the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Your grandmother made me promise never to tell you. She said it was handled, that it was over. But if you're asking these questions... She took a shaky breath. There was a man, years ago, before I was born. He worked for the family who lived in that house before your grandmother bought it. A handyman, I think. He was troubled, obsessed with the daughter. When they found out, they fired him, but he didn't leave. My skin was crawling. What do you mean he didn't leave? He hid in the attic. Lived up there for almost a year, coming down at night while the family slept, eating their food, watching them. The daughter started complaining about feeling like someone was in her room at night, but her parents didn't believe her. They thought she was being dramatic. The rain had started again outside. I could hear it against the windows, steady and relentless, but it sounded far away now. Everything sounded far away. What happened to him? I asked. He killed himself. Up there, in the attic. Hanged himself from the rafters when he realized they were finally going to find him. My mother's voice cracked. Your grandmother found out when she bought the house. The previous owners disclosed it, legally had to. She said she never felt anything strange there, never had any problems. She thought whatever had happened was finished. I thought about the footprints in the dust, smaller than mine, narrow. The prints of a man who'd spent a year creeping through a house in the dark, watching a family sleep. Mom, I said slowly, what was his name? I don't remember. Something common. James, maybe. Or John. She paused. Why? Honey, what's going on? I couldn't answer. I was staring at my fitness tracker, at the step count still displayed on the screen. 5,847 steps. Not my steps. His. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I sat in the living room with the lights blazing, my laptop open on the coffee table, searching for anything I could find about the house's history. Old newspaper archives, property records, obituaries, anything that might confirm what my mother had told me, or better yet, prove that it was just a story, a local legend that had gotten attached to the house over the years, exaggerated and embellished until it became something it never was. I found it around 2 a.m., a scanned article from the local paper dated March 17, 1959. The headline read, "Handyman found dead in attic of Milford home." The article was short, clinical, the kind of brief notice papers used to run about deaths that weren't quite respectable enough for a proper obituary. A man named Harold Eklund, 34, had been discovered deceased in the attic of a home on Birchwood Lane, my grandmother's address. He had apparently been living in the attic undetected for an extended period. The cause of death was listed as suicide by hanging. The article mentioned that the homeowners had reported disturbances in the weeks prior to the discovery. Objects moved, food missing from the pantry, their daughter complaining of nightmares, of feeling watched, of waking to find her bedroom door open when she was certain she'd closed it. I read that last line 3 times. Bedroom door open, just like mine. There was no photo of Harold Eklund, just his name, his age, and the bare facts of his death. I searched for more information, but 1959 was a long time ago. Whatever else there was to know about Harold had been lost to time, forgotten by everyone except the house that had been his final hiding place. The rain had stopped sometime around 3 a.m. The silence it left behind was worse, thick and heavy, pressing against the windows like something waiting to be let in. I closed my laptop and sat there in the too bright living room, listening to the house settle around me. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Above me, in the attic. Slow and deliberate, moving from one end of the space to the other. The ceiling creaked with each step, dust sifting down in tiny particles that I could see drifting through the lamplight. I sat frozen, barely breathing, tracking the sound as it moved directly overhead. It reached the far end of the attic, paused, and then started back, pacing, just like the recording, just like my fitness tracker data. I should have run. I should have grabbed my keys and left, driven to a hotel, called someone, done anything except what I actually did. But something had shifted in me over the past few days. The fear was still there. God, it was so present I could taste it, metallic and sharp. But underneath it was something else. Anger, maybe, or exhaustion. I was so tired of being afraid in my own home, tired of sleeping with the lights on, tired of dreading the morning and what the data would show, tired of feeling like a prisoner in a house that was supposed to be my sanctuary. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but they held. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. No creaking, no settling, no rain. Just me and the house and whatever was waiting in the attic. I walked to the hallway, each step feeling like a choice I couldn't take back. The pull-down ladder hung from the ceiling, the same ladder I'd climbed 2 days ago when I'd found the footprints. I reached up and pulled it down. The hinges screamed, a rusted, agonized sound that shattered the silence. I flinched, but didn't stop. The ladder extended, section by section, until it touched the floor with a soft thud. Above, the attic hatch gaped open like a mouth. I climbed. The attic was dark. The bulb had burned out, or maybe something had unscrewed it. The thought made my stomach lurch, but I pushed it away. I used my phone's flashlight instead, sweeping the beam across the cluttered space. Boxes, old furniture, the dressmaker's dummy in its corner, its headless form casting a long shadow across the floorboards. The footprints were gone. Where there had been clear tracks in the dust 2 days ago, there was nothing now. The dust was smooth, undisturbed, like no one had walked here in years. I stood at the top of the ladder, flashlight trembling in my grip, trying to understand. Had I imagined them? Had I imagined all of it? Then my light caught something near the eaves, a mark on one of the rafters. I moved closer, picking my way between boxes, my breath loud in the confined space. The mark was old, carved into the wood, not painted. Letters, I realized as I got closer. Initials. H.E. Harold Eklund. And below the initials, carved in the same shaky hand, I watch her sleep. The beam of my flashlight wavered. I couldn't keep my hand steady. The words were right there, cut into the wood 65 years ago by a man who had lived in this space, crept through this house, stood over a sleeping girl in the dark. Something moved behind me. I spun around. The flashlight swung wildly, throwing shadows everywhere. The dressmaker's dummy, a stack of boxes, the open hatch with the ladder leading down. Nothing there. Nothing I could see. But the air had changed. It felt thicker somehow, colder, and there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, of something old and sour, like clothes left to molder in a damp space. I ran. I don't remember climbing down the ladder. I just remember being in the hallway, shoving the ladder up, slamming the hatch closed. I remember grabbing my keys, my phone, my wallet. I remember running out the front door into the cold night air, leaving every light in the house blazing behind me. I I sat in my car in the driveway for an hour, shaking, watching the house, watching the windows. Around 4 a.m., I saw movement in the attic window. Just a shadow, a dark shape passing behind the glass. There for a moment, then gone. I didn't imagine it. I know I didn't imagine it. I drove to a motel and paid for a room with cash. I sat on the bed with the door locked and the lights on, and I didn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those words carved into the rafter. I watch her sleep, and I thought about the fitness tracker on my wrist. The steps it logged every night, the heart rate spikes, the way my body moved through the house while I was somewhere else, dreaming of nothing. Had Harold just been watching? Or had he been walking too, wearing me like a suit, using my body to pace the halls the way he'd done when he was alive? The thought made me want to tear the tracker off, throw it across the room, never look at it again. But I didn't, because as horrifying as it was, the tracker was proof, evidence that something was happening, something real. I needed to figure out how to stop it. I just didn't know if that was possible. I stayed at the motel for 3 days. During the day, I made phone calls. A priest first. I'm not particularly religious, but I didn't know where else to start. He listened politely, asked if I'd considered speaking to a therapist, and suggested I pray about it. When I pushed, asking if he could bless the house, he said he'd need to consult with his bishop. He never called back. I tried a paranormal investigation group next, one of those amateur outfits that posts videos online. They were eager, too eager, honestly. They wanted to bring cameras, equipment, a whole crew. They wanted to make content out of my nightmare. I hung up on them. Finally, I called a woman my mother vaguely remembered, someone my grandmother had consulted once, years ago, about household problems. It took 2 days to track her down. Her name was Ruth, and she was 83 years old, living in a nursing home 40 minutes outside the city. When I explained who I was and why I was calling, she went quiet for a long time. "Birchwood Lane," she said finally. Her voice was thin but steady. "I remember that house. Your grandmother called me in. Must have been 1978. She was worried about her daughter, your mother, having nightmares, feeling watched at night." My grip tightened on the phone. "What did you tell her?" I told her the truth. That house has something attached to it, something that stayed behind when Harold Eklund died. He spent so long watching that family, wanting what he couldn't have. That part of him got stuck there, bound to the house, bound to the watching. How do I make it stop? Ruth was quiet again. When she spoke, her voice was gentler, sadder. "You can't make it stop, honey. Not completely. Harold's been in that house for 65 years. He's part of it now, sunk into the walls and the floors and the air itself. Your grandmother learned to live with it, set boundaries, rules." "What kind of rules?" "She never slept in the back bedroom, the one closest to the attic. She kept a light on in the hallway every night. She talked to him sometimes, out loud, told him this was her house now, and he wasn't welcome to walk around anymore. I don't know if he understood, but the activity died down after that. Became manageable, like Harold Eklund was a pest problem, a leaky faucet, something you learn to live with." "But my grandmother died 2 years ago," I said, "and I've been sleeping in that back bedroom since I moved in." "Then he's been waiting," Ruth said simply, "waiting for someone new." I went back to the house that afternoon. I didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at me to sell it, walk away, never set foot inside again. But the house was mine. My grandmother had left it to me because she trusted me to take care of it. And some stubborn, defiant part of me refused to let Harold Eklund drive me out of my own home. I started in the attic. I found the rafter with his initials, with those carved words, and I sanded them down until the wood was smooth and blank. I dragged everything out of the attic. Every box, every piece of furniture, the dressmaker's dummy that had terrified me in the dark, and I hauled it all to the curb for garbage pickup. Then I sealed the hatch with 3 deadbolts, the heavy-duty kind, screwed directly into the frame. I moved my bedroom to the front of the house, as far from the attic as I could get. I installed motion sensor lights in every hallway. I left a lamp burning in the corridor outside my door every single night. And I talked to him, out loud, feeling foolish, standing in the middle of my living room with my arms crossed over my chest. This is my house now, Harold. You don't get to walk around anymore. You don't get to use my body. You don't get to watch me sleep. I know what you did, and I know what happened to you. And I'm sorry you died alone up there. But that doesn't give you the right to haunt me. So stay in your attic, stay behind those deadbolts, and leave me alone. The house was silent. The rain had started up again, tapping against the windows, filling the space with white noise. I stood there for a long time, waiting for something to happen. A response. A sign. Nothing came. That was 4 months ago. I still live in the house. The fitness tracker still sits on my wrist. I can't bring myself to take it off because I need to know. Every morning I check the data. Most nights now my step count stays flat. 0 movement, 0 activity. Just the steady rhythm of my sleeping heart rate, calm, and even through the dark hours. But sometimes, maybe once a week, maybe less, I'll wake up to a handful of steps logged in the middle of the night. 50, 100, never more than that. A short walk, a brief stirring, and then stillness again. I tell myself it's just the tracker glitching, sensors misfiring, data corrupting, the normal imperfections of technology. I almost believe it. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the floorboards creak above my head. Soft, careful footsteps moving through the sealed attic. Pacing back and forth, the rhythm slow and patient. He's still up there, waiting, watching in whatever way he can. I've learned to live with it. The deadbolts hold. The lights stay on. I don't go into the attic, and whatever's up there doesn't come down. We've reached an understanding, Harold and I. An uneasy truce between the living and the dead. But I still check my fitness tracker every morning. Still scan the step count, the heart rate, the movement data. Still hold my breath until I see that flat line, that proof that my body stayed in bed where it belonged. And every now and then, when the numbers show those extra steps, those midnight walks I don't remember taking, I wonder if Ruth was wrong. I wonder if Harold is really staying in his attic, or if he's just gotten better at hiding, better at making me think I'm in control. I wonder sometimes what my face looks like when I sleep, if I'm smiling. To this day, I keep the lights on. To this day, I check the data every morning before I do anything else. And to this day, I never look at the attic hatch when I walk down that hallway at night. Because I'm afraid that one day I'll look up and find it open, and I'm even more afraid of what I'll see looking down. Story 3, the gas station attendant who warned me not to stop again. Let me tell you why I don't drive at night anymore. It was last October, and I was relocating from Phoenix to Portland for a new job. Software development position, good salary, fresh start in a city I'd always wanted to live in. I'd sold most of my furniture, packed what was left into my Honda Civic, and decided to make the drive in one shot. 18 hours, maybe 19 with stops. I'd done longer drives before. I figured I'd power through, sleep when I got there, save the money I would have spent on a motel. That was my first mistake. I left Phoenix around 4 p.m., which meant I hit the empty stretches of Nevada right around midnight. I'd taken a route my GPS suggested, faster than the interstate it claimed, cutting through some rural highways I'd never heard of. The roads were good at first, well lit, well maintained, occasional signs of civilization. But as the hours wore on and I pushed further north, everything started to thin out. Fewer cars, fewer lights, fewer signs that anyone lived out here at all. By 1 a.m., I hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour. The highway had narrowed to 2 lanes, winding through flat, empty desert that stretched to the horizon in every direction. No moon that night, just a thick blanket of clouds that turned the sky into a ceiling of black. My headlights carved a small tunnel of visibility through the dark, and beyond that, nothing. Just endless nothing. The needle on my gas gauge had been hovering near empty for the last 20 miles. I'd meant to fill up earlier, but I kept thinking there'd be another station around the next bend. There wasn't. The GPS showed nothing nearby, just a gray void where town should be. My phone had lost signal about 40 minutes back. I was starting to genuinely worry when I saw the glow. It was faint at first, a pale smudge of light on the horizon that could have been anything. But as I got closer, it resolved into the familiar shape of a gas station. Small, ancient-looking, with 2 pumps out front and a little building behind them that might have been a convenience store. The sign above it was old enough that I couldn't read what it said, the letters weathered into ghosts of themselves. I pulled in. The pumps were the old kind. No credit card slots, no digital displays. Just analog gauges and metal handles that looked like they'd been there since the 1970s. A single fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow pallor. The rain had started somewhere in the last few miles. A light drizzle that misted my windshield and made the light scatter into halos. I sat in my car for a moment, engine idling, looking around. The station seemed deserted. No other cars, no movement behind the grimy windows of the store. For a moment I considered just driving on, pushing my luck, hoping I'd find something else before the tank ran dry. Then the door to the store opened and a man stepped out. He was older, 60s, maybe 70s, with a weathered face and deep-set eyes that caught the fluorescent light in a way that made them look almost reflective. He wore a faded blue work shirt with a name patch I couldn't read and jeans stained with what might have been oil. He didn't smile as he approached my car, just walked over with a slow, deliberate gait, like someone who had all the time in the world. I rolled down my window. "Fill it up?" he asked. His voice was rough, like gravel scraping against itself. "Please, regular's fine." He nodded and moved to the pump. I watched him in my side mirror as he lifted the nozzle, inserted it into my tank, started the flow. His movements were mechanical, practiced. He'd done this thousands of times, maybe tens of thousands. The rain picked up slightly, drumming against my roof. I sat there listening to it mix with the hum of the pump, the buzz of the overhead light, the distant rumble of thunder somewhere out in the desert. The air smelled like wet pavement and something else, something faintly chemical, like old gasoline left to evaporate in the sun. The pump clicked off. The man replaced the nozzle, walked to my window. I already had cash ready. I didn't trust that this place would take cards, and I was right. He took the bills, counted them slowly, tucked them into his shirt pocket. "Thank you," I said, reaching for the gear shift. "Wait!" His hand came down on my window frame. Not aggressive, just firm, holding me in place. I looked up at him, and something in his expression had changed. The neutral, tired look was gone. In its place was something I couldn't quite identify. Concern, maybe, or fear. "This road," he said slowly. "You keep driving north, you'll hit Route 17. When you get there, you turn east, toward Elko. Don't take the shortcut through Miller's Pass, you understand?" Okay, sure. "And listen to me carefully." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to something just above a whisper. "Don't stop again. Not for anything, not for anyone. No matter what you see on the road, you keep driving. Don't slow down, don't pull over. Just drive until you hit Elko." I stared at him. "What do you mean? What would I see?" He didn't answer, just stepped back from my car, his eyes still locked on mine. In the yellow light, with the rain misting down around him, he looked almost like a photograph, something frozen in time. "Don't stop," he said again, "please." I drove away. For the first few miles, I told myself it was nothing. Small town superstition, some local legend about a haunted stretch of highway, the kind of story old men told to scare tourists. I'd grown up in the Southwest. I knew how these things worked. Every rural community had its ghost stories, its warnings, its tales of things that lurked in the dark. It didn't mean any of it was real, but I couldn't shake the look in his eyes, the urgency in his voice, the way he'd said please, like he was begging me. The rain intensified. My wipers beat a steady rhythm against the windshield, smearing the water into streaks that caught my headlights and scattered them into fractured beams. The road stretched ahead, empty and dark, winding through desert that had become featureless in the storm. I was about 20 miles past the station when I saw her. A woman standing on the shoulder of the road, just at the edge of my headlights, almost swallowed by the dark. She was waving, one arm raised, moving back and forth in the universal gesture of someone who needed help. I slowed instinctively, my foot lifting off the gas. "Don't stop, no matter what you see." I hesitated. She was still waving, more urgently now. I could see her more clearly as I got closer. Young, maybe my age, wearing a light dress that was soaked through from the rain. She looked desperate. She looked scared. My foot hovered over the brake. And then I remembered the old man's face, the fear in his eyes. I pressed the accelerator and drove past her. In my rearview mirror, I watched her figure shrink into the darkness. She was still standing there, arm raised, watching me go. I told myself I'd call for help when I got signal, send someone back for her. I told myself I was being smart, being safe. But something in my gut told me I'd just made the right choice. And something else told me the night was far from over. 5 miles later, I saw her again. Same woman, same dress, same desperate wave, standing on the right shoulder of the road like she'd been waiting for me, like she'd known exactly where I'd be. That wasn't possible. I'd been driving 60, 65 miles an hour. There was no way she could have gotten ahead of me on foot. No way she could have known which route I'd take. And yet there she was, caught in my headlights, her arm moving in that same slow arc, waving me down. I didn't slow this time. I gripped the steering wheel and stared straight ahead as I passed her. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see her standing there, watching me go. I didn't want to see her face. The rain was coming down hard now, sheets of water that overwhelmed my wipers and turned the road into a blurred smear of reflected light. Thunder rolled across the desert, low and constant, vibrating in my chest. I leaned forward in my seat, squinting through the windshield, trying to keep track of the faded lines that marked the edges of the highway. 3 miles later, I saw the sign for Route 17. Relief flooded through me. I slowed just enough to make the turn, swinging east like the attendant had told me, toward Elko, toward civilization. The road here was slightly wider, slightly better maintained. I let myself breathe, and then I saw the other sign. Miller's Pass, 12 miles, scenic route. It pointed to a turnoff just ahead, a narrow road that branched off into the darkness. I remembered what the attendant had said. Don't take the shortcut through Miller's Pass. I had no intention of taking it. I pressed the gas and kept driving east. But as I passed the turnoff, something caught my eye. A car, parked on the shoulder of the pass road, just past where the pavement curved out of sight. Its headlights were off, but I could see it clearly in the moment my own lights swept across it. A dark sedan, older model, sitting motionless in the rain. And standing next to it, illuminated for just a fraction of a second, were 3 figures. I couldn't make out details, just shapes, human shapes, standing in a row beside the car, not moving, not waving, just standing there facing the highway, facing me. I looked away, focused on the road, drove. My hands were shaking. I could feel my heart thudding against my ribs, too fast, too hard. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen, A family with car trouble, travelers waiting out the storm, something normal, something explainable, but they hadn't been doing anything. They'd just been standing there, in the rain, in the dark, watching the highway. The next 10 miles were the longest of my life. I kept my eyes locked on the road, refusing to look at the shoulders, refusing to check my mirrors more than I absolutely had to. The storm was directly overhead now, lightning splitting the sky every few seconds, the thunder so loud it drowned out my engine. Rain hammered the roof of my car like fists pounding to get in. And then my headlights caught something in the road. I slammed the brakes. The car fishtailed on the wet pavement, tires screaming, and I fought the wheel, heart in my throat, certain I was about to spin out into the desert. But the car held. I came to a stop sideways across both lanes, engine still running, wipers still beating. In front of me, maybe 20 feet away, was a figure. Not the woman this time. A man. Tall, thin, wearing dark clothes that made him almost invisible against the night. He was standing in the exact center of the road, arms at his sides, head slightly tilted like he was studying me. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't speak. He just stood there, waiting. I couldn't see his face. He was too far away, and the rain was too heavy, and my headlights seemed to slide off him like they couldn't quite hold on. But I could feel him looking at me. I could feel his attention, heavy and patient, pressing against the windshield like a physical weight. Don't stop, no matter what you see. I was stopped. I was exactly where I wasn't supposed to be. I threw the car into drive and floored it. The car lurched forward, tires spinning before they caught. I aimed straight for where the man was standing, some desperate part of my brain reasoning that he'd move, he'd have to move. No one just stands there when a car is coming at them. He didn't move. I swerved at the last second, missing him by inches, and as I passed, I finally saw his face. It was wrong. The proportions were wrong. The features were arranged in the right places, eyes, nose, mouth. But they didn't fit together properly, like a child's drawing of a face, rendered in 3 dimensions, like something that had seen humans but didn't quite understand how they worked, and he was smiling. I didn't look back. I pressed the accelerator to the floor and drove, the speedometer climbing past 70, 80, the car shuddering as it fought against the rain and wind. The lightning flashed, illuminating the desert in frozen snapshots of white, and in one of those flashes I saw them. More figures, dozens of them, standing in the desert on both sides of the road, spaced evenly apart, stretching back as far as I could see, all of them facing the highway, all of them watching me pass. I started to cry. I couldn't help it. The tears came hot and fast, blurring my vision even more, and I wiped at my eyes with one hand while the other gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't understand what these things were, or what they wanted, or why I was the one driving through the middle of them. But I understood one thing with perfect crystalline clarity. If I stopped, I would never leave this road. So I drove. Through the rain, through the lightning, through the gauntlet of figures that watched from the dark. And somewhere behind me, I heard something that sounded like laughter. The laughter followed me for miles. It wasn't coming from outside the car. That was the worst part. It was inside somehow, faint and crackling, like a bad radio transmission bleeding through static. I checked my phone, but it was still dead. No signal, screen dark. I checked the car's radio, but it was off. Had been off since I'd left Phoenix. The sound came anyway. Soft, chittering laughter that rose and fell in waves. Sometimes so quiet I could almost convince myself it was just the rain. Sometimes loud enough that it seemed to be coming from the back seat. I didn't look. I couldn't look. I knew if I turned around, if I took my eyes off the road for even a second, something terrible would happen. So I stared straight ahead and gripped the wheel and drove through that impossible laughter while tears streamed down my face. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the sound faded. The storm began to ease, the rain thinning from a downpour to a drizzle. The lightning moved off to the east, still flickering on the horizon, but no longer directly overhead. I loosened my grip on the wheel, just slightly, and allowed myself to take a breath. That's when I noticed my gas gauge. It was on empty. The needle had dropped below the red line, hovering in that dead zone where most cars would already have stalled. But I'd filled up at the station. I'd watched the attendant do it, watched the numbers on the pump climb. I'd had a full tank less than an hour ago. I looked at the odometer. According to my car, I'd driven 247 miles since leaving the gas station. That wasn't possible. I'd been on the road for maybe 45 minutes, an hour at most. Even driving as fast as I had been, there was no way I'd covered that kind of distance. No way I'd burned through an entire tank of gas. Unless time didn't work the same way out here. Unless distance didn't mean what I thought it meant. The engine sputtered. No. I pressed the gas, trying to coax whatever fumes were left in the tank to keep me moving. The car lurched forward, then sputtered again. The dashboard lights flickered. The headlights dimmed, brightened, dimmed again. And then, ahead, I saw lights. Real lights. Steady, electric, artificial. The glow of a town, small but unmistakably real. A cluster of buildings, street lights, the neon sign of what looked like a diner. Civilization. Safety. I nursed the car forward, engine coughing, praying to whatever might be listening that I'd make it. The lights grew closer. I could see the town more clearly now. A main street, a few parked cars, a water tower silhouetted against the clouds. A sign at the edge of town read, "Welcome to Elko." I'd made it. Against all odds, against all logic, I'd made it. The car died 50 feet past the welcome sign. Just gave up, engine cutting out, momentum carrying me forward until I rolled to a stop in front of the diner. I sat there for a long moment, hand still on the wheel, body shaking with residual adrenaline. The diner's neon sign buzzed overhead. Margie's, it said, open 24 hours, and inside I could see people. Actual people, sitting at booths, drinking coffee, living their normal lives. I got out of the car. The rain had stopped completely now. The air smelled clean, washed, like the storm had scrubbed everything fresh. I stood in the empty street and looked back the way I'd come, back toward the highway, the desert, the road I'd just driven. There was nothing there, just darkness and the faint outline of mountains against the sky. I walked into the diner on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. A bell chimed over the door. A waitress behind the counter looked up and smiled, a real smile, warm and tired and human. "Coffee, hon?" I nodded. I couldn't speak. I slid into a booth by the window and stared at my hands while she poured, trying to process what had happened, trying to convince myself I was safe. "You okay?" The waitress was still there, coffee pot in hand, studying me with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed. It came out wrong, too high, too sharp. Something like that. She didn't press. Just set down a menu and told me to holler if I needed anything. I wrapped my hands around the coffee mug, feeling the heat seep into my frozen fingers, and stared out the window at my dead car. I sat there for 3 hours, drank 4 cups of coffee, watched the sky lighten from black to gray to the pale pink of dawn. At some point, I called a tow truck. My phone had signal again somehow, like the dead zone had only existed on that stretch of road. The driver who came to collect my car was friendly, chatty. He asked what had happened to my gas, and I told him I didn't know. He checked the tank, scratched his head, said it was bone dry, but he couldn't find any leaks. "Weird," he said. "Never seen anything like it." Before he towed the car away, I asked him a question. "That road I came in on, Route 17, west of here, is there anything strange about it? He paused. His expression shifted, just for a moment. Something flickered behind his eyes that looked almost like recognition. Then it was gone, replaced by a friendly, blank smile. Strange how? I don't know. People on the road, things that don't make sense. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he shrugged. Lots of people come through here with stories about that stretch. Truckers, mostly. They say the road plays tricks on you at night. Makes you see things that aren't there. He hitched my car to his truck, not meeting my eyes. I don't drive it after dark myself. Haven't for years. Why not? He climbed into his cab, started the engine. Before he pulled away, he looked at me through the open window. Because the things people see out there aren't always tricks, he said. And the ones who stop to check don't always come back. He drove off. I stood in the parking lot of Margie's diner, watching my car disappear around a corner, and I thought about the gas station attendant. His warning, the fear in his eyes. Don't stop, no matter what you see. I'd followed his advice, and I'd made it. But I couldn't stop wondering about the ones who hadn't. I should have kept driving to Portland. Should have rented a car, finished the trip, started my new life, and never looked back. That's what any sane person would have done. Instead, I stayed in Elko. I told myself I needed to wait for my car to be repaired. The mechanic couldn't explain what had happened to the gas. No leaks, no damage, just an empty tank that should have been full. But he could at least make sure everything else was working. It would take a couple days, he said. I got a room at a motel off the main strip and told myself that was the only reason I was staying. But that wasn't true. The real reason was the gas station attendant. He'd saved my life. I was certain of that now. Whatever was out there on that road, whatever those things were, they would have taken me if I'd stopped. The woman waving for help, the man standing in the road, the figures watching from the desert. They were lures, all of them. Traps designed to make you pull over, get out, become vulnerable. And the attendant had known. He'd warned me, a complete stranger, with fear in his eyes and desperation in his voice. I wanted to thank him. I wanted to understand how he knew, what he'd seen, how long he'd been warning travelers about that stretch of road. On my second day in Elko, I drove back. Not at night. I wasn't that stupid. I rented a car from a place near the motel and headed west on Route 17 around noon, with the sun high and bright and the desert stretching out in every direction under a clear blue sky. In daylight, the road looked completely ordinary, just asphalt and scrub brush and the occasional passing truck. No figures, no woman in a wet dress, no sense of wrongness at all. I drove for almost 2 hours, retracing the route I'd taken that night. I watched the odometer carefully. The distances made sense this time, mile markers appearing exactly where they should. The turnoff for Miller's Pass came and went, just a narrow road leading into empty hills, no dark sedan parked on the shoulder. Everything was normal. But I couldn't find the gas station. I drove all the way to where Route 17 intersected with the highway I'd originally been on. Then I turned around and drove back, slower this time, scanning both sides of the road. There was nothing. No station, no pumps, no faded sign. Just mile after mile of empty desert, unbroken by any structure at all. I pulled over where I thought the station should have been. Got out, walked around. The ground was flat and bare. No foundation, no debris, no indication that anything had ever been built here. Just dirt and rocks and a few scrubby plants clinging to life in the dry soil. I stood there in the afternoon sun, turning in a slow circle, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. The station didn't exist. Maybe it never had. But I'd been there. I'd filled up my tank. I'd talked to the attendant, handed him cash, felt his hand on my window frame. It had been real. It had to have been real. I drove back to Elko feeling shaken in a way I couldn't articulate. That night, I went to a bar downtown, a quiet place with wood paneling and local beer on tap, and I started asking questions. casual at first. "Hey, you ever hear any weird stories about Route 17? Anything strange happen out in the desert?" Most people shrugged me off, gave me the same vague answers the tow truck driver had. The road plays tricks, people see things, don't drive it at night. Standard small-town folklore, the kind of thing locals tell tourists to seem mysterious. But then I met Carl. He was in his 70s, sitting alone at the end of the bar with a whiskey he'd been nursing for an hour. When I asked my questions, he looked at me differently than the others had. Looked at me like he recognized something in my face. "You drove it," he said. Not a question. "Recently, at night?" "Yeah, a few days ago." He nodded slowly, took a sip of his whiskey. "And you're still here. That's good. That's real good." "What do you mean?" He was quiet for a long moment. The bar hummed with conversation around us, but it felt distant, like we were in our own pocket of silence. "There used to be a gas station out there," he said finally. "Long time ago, 40s, maybe 50s, run by a man named Earl Jessup. Good man from what I heard. Looked out for travelers, warned them about the road." My heart was pounding. What happened to him? Same thing that happens to everyone who tries to help. Carl stared into his glass. The road took him. One night he just wasn't there anymore. Station was abandoned, fell apart over the years. They tore down what was left in the 70s. Nothing there now but dirt. But I stopped there. I talked to him, to the attendant. He filled my tank. Carl looked at me. His eyes were old and tired and full of something that might have been pity. "What did he tell you to do?" "He told me not to stop, no matter what I saw." "And did you?" "No, I kept driving." Carl nodded again, slower this time. "Then he's still doing his job, still warning people, even after all these years, even after they took him." He finished his whiskey in one long swallow. "Earl Jessup was a good man. I guess death didn't change that." I sat there, unable to speak. The bar noise washed over me, meaningless and far away. "The gas in your tank," Carl said. "When you got to town, how much was left?" "None. It was empty." "But you made it anyway." "Yeah." He smiled, but there was no humor in it. Earl always did have a way of getting people where they needed to go, even when the math didn't work out. He stood up, dropped some bills on the bar. "My advice? Don't go back to that road. Don't try to find answers. Just be grateful you made it through and spend the rest of your life driving in daylight." He walked out. I never saw him again, but I spent the rest of that night thinking about Earl Jessup, a man who'd died decades ago, still standing at a gas station that no longer existed, still warning travelers about the things that waited in the dark, still trying to save people, even from beyond the grave. I made it to Portland eventually. My car was fixed, or at least the mechanic couldn't find anything wrong with it, and I finished the drive in daylight, sticking to the interstate the whole way. I started my new job, found an apartment, built something like a normal life. Months passed, then a year. I told myself I'd moved on, but you don't move on from something like that. You just learn to carry it differently. I still don't drive at night, not if I can help it. My coworkers think I'm paranoid, overly cautious, the kind of person who plans every trip down to the minute so I never end up on an unfamiliar road after dark. They're not wrong. I am that person now. I became that person the night I drove through something I still can't explain and came out the other side only because a dead man told me not to stop. I think about Earl Jessup a lot. I looked him up after I got to Portland, spent hours digging through old newspaper archives, census records, anything I could find. There wasn't much. An obituary from 1952, brief and matter-of-fact. Earl Raymond Jessup, 67, owner and operator of Jessup's service station on Route 17, found deceased on the premises. Cause of death undetermined. No family listed. No funeral arrangements mentioned. Just a man who lived alone, worked alone, and died alone on a stretch of road that swallowed travelers whole. The obituary mentioned that he was known for helping stranded motorists, that he'd stayed open late specifically to assist people passing through at night, that locals credited him with saving dozens of lives over the years, warning drivers about flash floods, washed-out roads, dangerous conditions. It didn't mention what happened to the people he couldn't save. It didn't mention the things on the road. But I found other records too. Police reports from the 40s and 50s, mostly missing persons cases. Travelers who'd set out across that stretch of Nevada and never arrived at their destinations. Cars found abandoned on the shoulder of Route 17, doors open, engines still running, no sign of the occupants. One report mentioned a family of 4 who'd stopped to help a woman flagged down on the roadside. They were never seen again. A woman flagged down on the roadside. I stopped researching after that. Some knowledge doesn't help. Some answers only make the weight heavier. But here's the thing I can't stop thinking about, even now. The thing that keeps me up at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain against my window. Earl Jessup died in 1952. His station was torn down in the 70s. There's nothing left of it now. I saw that myself, stood on the empty ground where it used to be. And yet, on a rainy night last October, I pulled into that station. I watched him fill my tank. I felt his hand on my window, heard his voice in my ear. He's still there. After 70 years, he's still standing at those pumps, waiting for travelers who take the wrong road at the wrong time. Still warning them, still saving them. But what happens when someone doesn't listen? I've thought about this more than I should. I've imagined the travelers who ignored his warning, who stopped for the woman on the shoulder, who pulled over when they saw the man in the road. I've imagined what those things did to them, those figures with their wrong faces, their patient smiles, their terrible patience. I don't know exactly what happens to the people who stop. I don't want to know. But I think Earl does. I think he's watched it happen over and over for 7 decades. I think that's why he's still there. Not because he can't move on, but because he won't. Because someone has to stand between the living and whatever waits in that darkness. I went back one more time, about 6 months after I'd settled in Portland. I don't know why. Some compulsion I couldn't explain. Some need to see it again. I drove to Nevada, took Route 17 in the middle of the day, parked where the station should have been. Nothing. Just empty desert, same as before. I sat in my car for an hour, watching the heat shimmer off the asphalt, half hoping I'd see something. A building flicker into existence. A figure appear by the road. Some sign that Earl was still out there, still keeping watch. The sun began to set. The sky turned orange, then red, then purple. I knew I should leave. I knew what the darkness brought. But just before I started the engine, I saw something. A light, faint and distant, out in the desert where no light should be. It flickered once, twice, like a fluorescent bulb struggling to stay on. And then it was gone. I drove away. I tell this story sometimes when I've had a few drinks, when someone asks why I won't drive after dark. Most people don't believe me. They think it's an urban legend, a campfire tale, something I picked up from the internet. That's fine. I don't need them to believe. I just need them to listen. Because somewhere out there, on a lonely stretch of Nevada highway, Earl Jessup is still working the night shift. He's still filling tanks that shouldn't need filling, still warning travelers about a danger he can't fully explain. And every now and then, when the storms roll in and the darkness gets thick, someone listens to him. Someone keeps driving. Someone makes it through. I was one of the lucky ones. I met Earl Jessup on the worst night of my life, and he told me what I needed to hear. Don't stop, no matter what you see. I listened. If you ever find yourself on that road, if you ever see a gas station that shouldn't exist, run by a man with tired eyes and oil-stained hands, I hope you listen too. And if you see a woman waving for help on the side of the road, a man standing in your headlights, figures watching from the desert with faces that aren't quite right, keep driving. Don't slow down. And whatever you do, don't stop, because the things out there have all the time in the world, and they've learned to be patient. Story 4. The museum exhibit that moved overnight. The thing about working night security at a museum is that nothing is supposed to move. That sounds obvious, I know, but when you spend 8 hours alone in a building full of dead things, taxidermy animals frozen mid-stride, wax figures posed in historical tableau, mannequins dressed in clothes from centuries past, you start to appreciate the stillness. You rely on it. Everything stays exactly where it was when the last visitor left, exactly where it will be when the first visitor arrives. That predictability is what makes the job bearable. I took the position at the Hartwell Museum of Natural History in February, right after I turned 24. It wasn't glamorous. $17 an hour to walk the same 3 floors every 90 minutes, check the same doors, watch the same security feeds, but it was quiet. I was finishing my master's thesis on Victorian morning practices, and the overnight shift gave me 6 uninterrupted hours to read and write between rounds. The museum had free coffee in the break room and decent heating, which was more than I could say for my apartment. It felt like a good fit. The Hartwell was a regional museum, the kind that relied on school field trips and senior group tours to stay afloat. 3 floors of exhibits, fossils and geology in the basement, local wildlife and ecology on the main floor, rotating special exhibitions on the top floor. The building itself was old, a converted Victorian mansion that had been donated to the city in the 1920s, and it had all the character you'd expect. High ceilings, creaky floors, radiators that clanked and hissed through the night like they were trying to communicate in Morse code. I got used to the sounds quickly, the building settling as temperatures dropped, the HVAC system cycling on and off, the occasional skitter of mice in the walls, which I reported and maintenance ignored. At night, with the lights dimmed to their security setting, the museum took on a different quality. Shadows pooled in corners. The glass eyes of taxidermy deer seemed to track you as you passed. It was atmospheric, sure, but I wasn't the type to get spooked by atmosphere. I'd spent 3 years researching death rituals. I'd handled human hair woven into jewelry, studied photographs of posed corpses, read accounts of people who slept beside their dead loved ones for days before burial. A few stuffed animals in a dark building weren't going to rattle me. Then the Bellerose collection arrived. It was a traveling exhibition, antique automata and mechanical figures from a private collection in France. The Hartwell had been trying to book it for years, apparently, and when the opportunity finally came, the board of directors jumped at it despite the cost. I heard all this from my supervisor, Donna, who was simultaneously thrilled about the prestige and stressed about the logistics. The collection was insured for an amount she wouldn't specify, but described as obscene. Extra security protocols were implemented. I was given a new checklist, a new route, and strict instructions to report anything unusual immediately. The exhibition took up the entire top floor. 14 pieces total, arranged in a winding path through 3 connected galleries. Most of them were what you'd expect. Mechanical birds that had once sung, a monkey that had once played cymbals, a woman at a writing desk whose hand had once moved a pen across paper. Beautiful craftsmanship, intricate details, the kind of things that made you marvel at Victorian engineering even as they made your skin prickle with their almost aliveness. But there was one piece that was different. It stood in the center of the final gallery, on a raised platform with its own dedicated lighting. A girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old, dressed in a pale blue gown with yellowed lace trim. Her hair was real, human hair, the placard informed me, sourced from the original model, cascading over her shoulders in dark ringlets. Her hands were posed in front of her, fingers curled slightly as though she'd just released something, or was about to catch it. Her face was porcelain, delicate features, rosebud lips, cheeks with the faintest hint of painted blush. Her eyes were glass, a shade of blue that matched her dress, and they stared straight ahead with that peculiar blankness that all antique dolls have. The placard identified her as La Petite Madeleine, created in 1876 by a craftsman named Auguste Vernier. It noted that she was one of the most sophisticated automata ever built, capable of over 40 distinct movements when wound. It did not explain why Vernier had made her, or who the original Madeleine had been. Something about her bothered me from the first night. I couldn't explain it. She was just a doll, an elaborate, expensive, extremely well-preserved doll, but standing in front of her made something twist in my stomach. Her eyes seemed too focused. Her stillness seemed too deliberate, like she was holding her breath, waiting for something. The other automata looked like machines pretending to be alive. Madeleine looked like something alive pretending to be a machine. I did my first round at 11 p.m., the way I always did. Walked the basement, the main floor, the top floor, checked all the doors, all the windows. Everything was exactly as it should be. I stopped in front of Madeleine for maybe 30 seconds, studying her, trying to identify what was triggering my unease. Then I shook it off and went back to the security office to work on my thesis. At 2 a.m., I did my second round. The basement was fine. The main floor was fine. I climbed the stairs to the top floor, flashlight in hand, footsteps echoing in the empty galleries. I walked past the mechanical birds, the cymbal-playing monkey, the woman at her writing desk. I turned the corner into the final gallery, and I stopped. Madeleine's hands were different. I was sure of it. Before, her fingers had been curled in front of her, relaxed, waiting. Now they were raised slightly higher, her palms turned outward, like she was reaching for something, like she was about to embrace someone who wasn't there. I stood frozen in the doorway, flashlight beam fixed on her hands, trying to remember if I'd looked closely enough the first time, trying to convince myself I was wrong. But I wasn't wrong. Something had changed. I just didn't want to believe it yet. I told myself I'd imagined it. Stressed from thesis work, sleep-deprived, spending too many hours alone in a building full of objects designed to look almost alive. The human brain is wired for pattern recognition, for seeing faces in clouds and movement in stillness. It's called pareidolia, and it's perfectly normal, and that's what was happening here. I'd glanced at Madeleine for 30 seconds on my first round and constructed a false memory based on incomplete information. Her hands hadn't moved. They'd always been in that position. I just hadn't been paying attention. I took a photo with my phone anyway, just in case. The next few rounds were uneventful. 3:30 a.m., everything in place. 5 a.m., everything in place. When the morning staff arrived at 7, I handed off to the day guard, a cheerful older man named Pete who'd worked at the museum for 20 years, and drove home without mentioning what I thought I'd seen, what I hadn't seen, what couldn't have happened. I slept poorly. Dreams I couldn't remember, just the lingering sense of being watched. When I woke in the late afternoon, the first thing I did was check my phone. The photo was still there. Madeleine on her platform, hands raised, palms out. I stared at it for a long time, trying to remember if that's how she'd looked at 11 p.m. I couldn't be certain. That was the problem. Memory is unreliable, and I hadn't been paying close attention, and there was no baseline to compare against. I needed documentation. Proof. That night I came to work with a plan. At 11 p.m., before I started my first round, I went straight to the top floor. I photographed Madeleine from 3 different angles, making sure to capture her hands, her posture, the exact position of her head. I measured the distance between her fingers and the edge of her platform, using a piece of paper with marked increments. I even counted the folds in her dress, the curls in her hair, anything that might serve as a reference point. She looked exactly as she had in last night's photo, hands raised, palms out, but something else was different. Her eyes. I hadn't noticed it in the photo, hadn't thought to check, but standing in front of her now, flashlight angled upward, I could see it clearly. Her eyes weren't facing straight ahead anymore. They'd shifted, just slightly, just a few degrees, to the left, toward the doorway, toward where I always entered the gallery. I took more photos, documented everything. Then I went back to the security office and pulled up the camera feeds. The top floor had 2 cameras, one covering the first 2 galleries, one covering the third, where Madeline stood. I rewound through the previous 12 hours, watching on fast forward, looking for any sign of tampering, staff moving through during open hours, visitors pointing, taking pictures, leaning too close before being ushered back by docents, the cleaning crew coming through after closing, vacuuming around the platforms, careful not to touch anything. Then the museum went dark, the galleries empty, and nothing moved. Nothing at all. I slowed the footage to real time and watched the hours tick by. Madeline stood motionless on her platform. No one entered the gallery. No one touched her. The image was grainy. The security cameras were old, the resolution poor, but I could see her clearly enough. She didn't move, not once. But when I compared the footage from 6 p.m. to the footage from 6 a.m., her eyes were different. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. In the evening, she looked straight ahead. By morning, she was looking left. The camera hadn't caught the movement. The camera hadn't caught anything. I sat in the security office for a long time, staring at the frozen image on the monitor. The radiators clanked. The building settled. Somewhere in the walls, mice scrabbled through insulation. There had to be an explanation. I started researching automata that night, abandoning my thesis for the first time in months. The mechanics of movement, the winding mechanisms, the way these figures were designed to operate. Most automata required someone to activate them, turn a key, flip a switch, engage a lever. But I learned that some of the more sophisticated pieces had secondary systems, hidden triggers, mechanisms that could be activated by changes in temperature, humidity, air pressure. A museum at night, with its cycling HVAC and fluctuating conditions, might create exactly the kind of environmental shifts that could what? Make a porcelain doll turn its eyes? Make fingers rise of their own accord? I was grasping. I knew I was grasping. But the alternative was accepting that something impossible was happening, and I wasn't ready for that. The next night, I set up my own camera. I borrowed a digital video camera from a friend, high resolution, good low light capability, and placed it in the corner of the third gallery, angled directly at Madeline's platform. I told myself I was being thorough, scientific, ruling out environmental factors, proving once and for all that I was imagining things. I did my rounds as usual, 11 p.m., 2 a.m., 3:30 a.m. Each time I entered the gallery, I checked Madeline's position, compared it to the photos I'd taken at the start of the night. She hadn't moved. Her hands were in the same position. Her eyes faced the same direction. I began to feel foolish, embarrassed by my paranoia. At 5 a.m., I retrieved the camera and brought it back to the security office. 6 hours of footage to review. I made coffee, settled into my chair, and pressed play. For the first 4 hours, nothing happened. Madeline stood on her platform, motionless, exactly as she should be. The gallery was dark and still. The only movement was the occasional flicker of shadows as clouds passed over the skylight, filtering the moonlight that crept through the old windows. Then, at 3:47 a.m., something changed. I leaned forward, squinting at the screen. It wasn't Madeline moving. She remained frozen in place. It was something else. Something in the corner of the frame, just at the edge of visibility. A shadow, tall and thin, standing in the doorway of the gallery. It hadn't been there at 3:46. I rewound, watched again. At 3:46, the doorway was empty. At 3:47, the shadow appeared. It didn't walk into frame, didn't emerge from the darkness. It was simply there, like it had always been there, like my eyes had just failed to notice it until now. I watched, barely breathing, as the shadow stood motionless for exactly 12 minutes. Then, at 3:59, it was gone, same as before, no movement, no transition, just there, one frame, gone the next, and Madeline's head had turned. Not her eyes this time, her entire head, rotated maybe 15 degrees to the right, toward the corner where my camera had been, toward where I had been standing, invisible behind the lens. She was looking at me. She'd been looking at me the whole time. I called in sick the next night, told Donna I had a stomach bug, something I'd eaten, I'd be fine in a day or two. She was understanding, told me to rest, drink fluids, not to worry about my shifts. I hung up and sat in my apartment with every light on, watching that 12-minute clip over and over until I'd memorized every pixel. The shadow didn't move. That was the thing I kept coming back to. For 12 minutes, it stood in that doorway like a photograph, like a cutout pasted onto the footage. No swaying, no shifting, no sign of breath or life. Just a tall, dark shape with no discernible features, watching, and then gone. I told myself it was a glitch, compression artifacts, some quirk of the camera's low-light processing that created a phantom shape where none existed, but I didn't believe it. I'd seen too many strange videos online, knew too well how people rationalized the inexplicable. The shadow was real. Madeline's movement was real. Something was happening in that museum after dark, and I'd captured it on film. I should have quit. That would have been the smart thing to do. Email Donna my resignation, find another job, never set foot in the Hartwell again. But I'd spent 3 years researching the Victorian obsession with death, with preservation, with the line between the living and the dead. I'd read accounts of spiritualists who claimed to communicate with the deceased, studied the elaborate rituals people invented to keep their loved ones close even after they were gone. I knew, intellectually, that the supernatural wasn't real, that there were always explanations, always rational causes, always science behind the seemingly impossible. But I also knew that the Victorians had believed, truly, desperately believed that the dead could be reached, that consciousness persisted, that love was strong enough to transcend mortality. And Auguste Vernier had been a Victorian. He'd built Madeline in 1876 at the height of the spiritualist movement, using real human hair from the original model. Who had the original Madeline been, and what had happened to her? I spent my sick days researching. The Bellerose collection had a sparse online presence, a few articles about its touring history, some photographs from previous exhibitions, nothing about the individual pieces. I found a reference to a catalog published in French, managed to track down a scanned copy through an academic database. My French was rusty, but good enough to get the basics. Auguste Vernier had been a clockmaker in Lyon, renowned for his intricate mechanisms and lifelike figures. He'd had one daughter, Madeleine Vernier, born in 1866, died in 1875, 9 years old, scarlet fever, according to the catalog, common enough in those days. Vernier had begun work on the automaton 6 months after his daughter's death. It took him nearly 2 years to complete. He used her hair, her measurements, a death mask cast of her face. He dressed her in her favorite gown, the pale blue one she'd worn to her last birthday party. He designed 40 distinct movements, each one based on gestures he'd observed in life. The way she reached for him when she wanted to be held, the way she turned her head when called, the way she smiled. He wanted to bring her back, not metaphorically, not symbolically. He actually believed that if he could recreate her perfectly enough, her spirit would return to inhabit the vessel he'd built. The catalog noted that Vernier had died in 1879, 3 years after completing the automaton. The The cause of death was listed as exhaustion and despair. He'd spent his final years in the workshop where Madeline stood, talking to her, winding her mechanism, watching her move through the same 40 gestures over and over. Neighbors reported hearing him speak to her at night, carrying on conversations with the silent figure as though she could respond. He never recovered from her death. He just found a different way to be with her. I went back to work on Thursday. Donna was glad to have me back. They'd been short-staffed, had to pull Pete for overtime. The whole schedule was a mess. I nodded along, said I was feeling better, clocked in at 10 p.m. like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I could feel it the moment I walked into the building, a weight in the air, a thickness, like the museum was holding its breath. I did my first round at 11, basement, main floor, top floor. I saved Madeline's gallery for last, delaying the inevitable, my heart rate climbing with each step up the stairs. When I finally turned the corner into the third gallery, flashlight in hand, I made myself look. She was facing me, not angled toward the doorway, not tilted slightly to the side. Facing me directly, her whole body rotated on the platform, her glass eyes fixed on the exact spot where I stood. Her hands were raised higher than before, palms out, fingers spread. The gesture I'd read about in the catalog. The way she reached for her father when she wanted to be held. I couldn't move. My legs had locked, my breath caught somewhere in my chest. The flashlight beam trembled against her face, casting shadows that made her features seem to shift. Her painted lips curved in a slight smile. Her glass eyes, reflecting my light back at me with a gleam that looked almost like recognition. Then the temperature dropped. It happened all at once. A plunge from comfortable to freezing in a matter of seconds. My breath fogged in front of me. The cold seeped through my uniform, into my skin, down into my bones. And behind me, in the doorway I'd just walked through, I heard something. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer. I spun around. The doorway was empty. The gallery beyond was dark, my flashlight beam cutting a narrow tunnel through the shadows but illuminating nothing. No one there. No one visible. But the footsteps continued. Closer. Closer. The sound of hard soles on marble, echoing in the empty space. I ran. I didn't think. Didn't rationalize. Just bolted past the empty doorway, through the first two galleries, down the stairs 3 at a time, not stopping until I was in the security office with the door locked behind me. I stood there gasping, hands shaking, watching the monitors. The camera showed the third gallery. Madeline on her platform, empty doorway. No shadow, no figure, no sign of anything wrong. But she'd moved again. In the seconds it had taken me to flee, she'd moved. Her head was tilted now. Her smile was wider, and her arms were extended toward the doorway, reaching for something just out of frame. Reaching for me. I didn't finish my shift that night. I called Donna at 3 a.m., told her there was a family emergency, told her I had to leave immediately. She was concerned, asked if I was okay, if there was anything she could do. I barely heard her. I just kept watching the monitor, watching Madeline's frozen embrace, waiting for her to move again. She didn't, not while I was watching, but I knew she would. The moment I looked away, the moment I left, she'd shift again, closer to the door, closer to the stairs, following a path I couldn't see toward a destination I didn't want to imagine. I went home as the sun was coming up. I should have felt safer in daylight. I always had before, but the fear followed me. I kept checking my mirrors as I drove, kept glancing at the back seat, kept expecting to see a pale blue dress in my peripheral vision. I made it to my apartment, locked every door, and sat on my couch without moving until my body finally gave out, and I fell asleep sitting up. I dreamed of a workshop, cluttered, dusty, filled with gears and springs and half-assembled mechanisms. A man sat at a workbench, his back to me, hunched over something I couldn't see. He was talking. A low, continuous murmur, the words unclear, but the tone unmistakable. Love, grief, longing. He turned. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, his hands stained with oil and something darker. He looked at me and smiled, and his smile was wrong, too wide, too knowing. "She likes you," he said. "She hasn't liked anyone in such a long time." I woke up gasping, heart pounding, the afternoon sun slanting through my blinds. My phone was buzzing, multiple missed calls from Donna, a string of texts asking me to call her back urgently. I ignored them. I couldn't go back there. I couldn't face that gallery again, couldn't stand in front of Madeline and feel her glass eyes track my movements, couldn't listen to those footsteps getting closer in the dark. But I couldn't stay away either. The thought came unbidden, and once it was there, I couldn't shake it. I couldn't stay away. I needed to understand what was happening, needed to find some way to make it stop. Running wouldn't help. I knew that instinctively, the way you know things in dreams. Madeline had chosen me. Whatever she wanted, whatever her father's grief had created, it had fixed its attention on me. Hiding in my apartment wouldn't change that. I called Donna back that evening, apologized for leaving so suddenly, said my emergency had been resolved, asked if I could come in for my regular shift. She was relieved. They were still short-staffed. Pete was exhausted. She'd been about to start calling temp agencies. I told her I'd be there at 10. Then I made another call. Her name was Dr. Patricia Welling, and she was the foremost expert on Victorian automata in North America. I'd found her during my research, read several of her papers, watched a lecture she'd given at a conference in Boston. She taught at a university in Connecticut, close enough to drive to if I'd had the time. Instead, I called her office and left a message explaining who I was, where I worked, and what I needed to know. She called me back 45 minutes later. "The Bella Rose collection," she said, her voice thoughtful. "I consulted on that exhibition years ago when it was being prepared for international tour. Remarkable pieces, the Vernier automaton especially. La Petite Madeleine." "Yes, you've seen it, I take it." "I work night security at the Hartwell. The exhibition is on our top floor." A pause. "I see." Something in her tone made me hesitate. "Dr. Welling, I need to ask you something about the automaton, about what Vernier was trying to do when he built it." Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was careful, measured. "What exactly have you experienced?" I told her everything. The movements, the shadow, the footsteps, the temperature drops, the feeling of being watched, being followed, being chosen. I told her about my dream, about Vernier's face, about the words he'd spoken. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, the silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Dr. Welling, I'm here." She took a breath. "I'm going to tell you something that I've never told anyone outside of a very small circle of colleagues, something that will sound insane, and that I don't expect you to believe. Try me. Auguste Vernier didn't just build an automaton, he conducted a ritual, a spiritualist ceremony performed over the course of months, designed to bind his daughter's spirit to the vessel he'd created. He used her hair, her death mask, objects she'd touched in life. He followed instructions from a medium who claimed to specialize in what they called soul transference. And according to his private journals, which I've seen, which I've held in my hands, he succeeded. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up. "The automaton has been in private collections for over a century," Dr. Welling continued. "Every owner has reported incidents, movement, sounds, sensations. Most dismissed it as imagination or mechanical malfunction. A few investigated further. 2 owners died under unusual circumstances, one in 1923, one in 1967. The collection was kept in storage for decades after that. When the Bellerose family decided to tour it, I advised against including the Vernier piece. They didn't listen. What does she want? The words came out hoarse. Why is she focusing on me? I don't know. Madeline was 9 when she died. A child. Children want simple things. Attention, connection, someone to play with. Dr. Welling paused. Or someone to replace what they lost. Her father. He died alone in his workshop, surrounded by his creations. The journal entries from his final months are disturbing. He wrote about hearing her voice, feeling her presence. He wrote about how happy she was, how grateful, how much she'd missed him. Her voice dropped. The last entry says only, "She's ready. Tonight we'll be together again." I thought about the shadow in the doorway, the footsteps in the dark, the cold that seeped into my bones. What happened to him? They found him sitting in a chair across from the automaton. His heart had stopped. No apparent cause, no sign of struggle. His eyes were open. He was smiling. She hesitated, and his hair had turned completely white. I looked at the clock. 9:15 p.m. I had 45 minutes before my shift started. How do I stop it? I asked. How do I make her leave me alone? Dr. Welling was quiet for a long time. I don't think you can, she said finally. I think once she's chosen someone, the connection is made. The only advice I can give you is this. Don't go back to that museum. Don't be alone with her. And whatever you do, whatever you hear, whatever you feel, don't let her touch you. She hung up. I sat in my apartment, watching the minutes tick by, and I thought about Madeline reaching out with her porcelain hands, the gesture her father had programmed, the way she asked to be held. Then I grabbed my keys and drove to work. I don't know why I went back. Maybe I thought Dr. Welling was wrong. Maybe I thought I could face whatever was happening and come out the other side. Maybe some part of me, the part that had spent years studying Victorian death rituals, that had never quite believed the supernatural was real, needed to see it through, to know, one way or another. Or maybe Madeline had already made the choice for me. The museum was quiet when I arrived. Donna had left for the night, Pete was long gone, and I had the building to myself until 7 a.m. I clocked in, made coffee, sat in the security office watching the monitors. The third-floor camera showed Madeline on her platform, exactly as I'd left her. Arms extended, head tilted, smile frozen in place. I didn't do my 11 p.m. round. I sat in the office and watched her on the screen, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The minutes crawled by. Midnight came and went. The building creaked and settled around me, radiators clanking, wind rattling the old windows. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds. At 1:17 a.m., the power went out. The monitors flickered and died, the lights cut off. The coffee maker stopped its quiet burble. I sat in absolute darkness, heart hammering, listening to the silence that had swallowed the building. Then I heard it. Music, faint and tinny like it was coming from very far away. A melody I didn't recognize. Something old, something delicate. The kind of tune that might have played from a music box in a child's bedroom 150 years ago. It was coming from upstairs. I should have stayed in the office, should have waited for the power to come back, called for help, done anything except what I actually did. But my body was moving before my brain could stop it. I stood up, found my flashlight, walked out into the dark hallway. The music grew louder as I climbed the stairs, clearer. I could hear individual notes now, a simple waltz rhythm, the kind of song you'd play to soothe a child to sleep. My flashlight cut a narrow beam through the darkness, illuminating paintings on the walls, display cases full of artifacts, the ordinary objects of a museum transformed into something sinister by shadow. I reached the top floor. The music was coming from the third gallery, from Madeline. I walked through the first gallery. The mechanical birds sat silent in their glass cases. I walked through the second gallery. The cymbal-playing monkey stared at me with painted eyes. I reached the doorway of the third gallery and stopped. Madeline wasn't on her platform anymore. She was standing in the center of the room, facing me, her music box mechanism whirring softly in her chest, playing that tinny waltz. Her arms were raised, reaching toward me. Her glass eyes caught my flashlight and reflected it back, 2 points of blue light in the darkness. And she was smiling. Not the painted smile I'd seen before. A real smile. A living smile. The expression of a child who had finally gotten what she wanted. I couldn't run. My legs wouldn't obey me. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching her, as the music box wound down and the melody slowed and finally stopped. In the silence, I heard breathing. Not my own. I'd stopped breathing. Someone else. Something else. The soft, steady respiration of a child standing 3 feet away from me in the dark. Play with me. The voice was small, high, the voice of a 9-year-old girl who had been dead for almost 150 years. Please, I'm so lonely. Father went away and I've been alone for so long. Her hands were still raised, still reaching. I could see them trembling slightly, the porcelain fingers quivering with anticipation. All I had to do was step forward, take her hands, let her pull me into whatever embrace she'd been waiting for since 1876. I thought about Auguste Vernier, found dead in his chair with white hair and a smile on his face. I thought about Dr. Welling's warning, "Don't let her touch you." "I can't," I whispered. "Madeline, I can't." The smile flickered. For a moment, something else crossed her face. Something darker, older, less like a child, and more like the thing that children become when they're denied what they want. "You will," she said. "Everyone does, eventually." The temperature plummeted. My flashlight died. In the absolute darkness, I heard her moving, porcelain feet clicking against the marble floor, getting closer, getting closer. The power came back on. The lights blazed to life. The monitors in my pocket buzzed as they rebooted, and Madeleine was back on her platform, motionless, inanimate, exactly where she was supposed to be, arms at her sides, eyes facing forward. No smile at all. I quit the next morning. Donna was confused, tried to talk me out of it, offered me better shifts, more money, whatever I needed. I just shook my head and handed her my badge and walked out without looking back. I couldn't explain what had happened. I couldn't make her understand. I finished my thesis 3 months later, moved to a different city, got a job at a library, day shifts only, nothing after dark, nothing that required me to be alone in a building full of old things. I tried to forget about the Hartwell Museum and the Bellerose collection and the automaton that had spoken to me in the dark. I almost succeeded. Then, 6 months ago, I saw a news article. The Bellerose collection was moving to a new venue, a museum in Chicago, bigger than the Hartwell, more visitors, more prestige. The article included photographs of the exhibition being packed up for transport. Workers in white gloves carefully lifting mechanical birds, wrapping the cymbal-playing monkey in protective cloth. And in the background of one photo, barely visible, a figure in a pale blue dress standing where no figure should be, facing the camera, smiling. I deleted the article, closed my laptop, told myself it was a trick of the light, a compression artifact, anything but what I knew it was. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that music. Faint and far away, like it's coming from the other side of a wall. A simple waltz rhythm, the kind of song you'd play to soothe a child to sleep. And sometimes, when the rain is falling and the house is quiet and I'm almost asleep, I feel something at the edge of my bed. A weight, a presence, small hands reaching toward me in the dark. I never open my eyes. I never look, because I know what Dr. Welling told me. I know what happens to the people Madeline chooses. And I know that she's patient, has been patient for almost 150 years. She's still waiting, and I'm afraid that one night I won't be strong enough to say no. Story 5, The Strangers Whispering Outside My Window Every Rainstorm. I used to love the rain. That's the first thing you need to understand about me. When I bought the house on Vickers Road, a 2-story farmhouse at the end of a long gravel drive, surrounded by fields and forest on the outskirts of a town most people have never heard of, the rain was part of the appeal. I'd grown up in Arizona, spent my whole life under relentless sun, and when I moved to Oregon for work, the gray skies and constant drizzle felt like a gift. I'd fall asleep to the sound of water on the roof, wake up to fog rolling through the trees, spend entire weekends watching storms sweep across the valley from my kitchen window. It felt peaceful. It felt like home. That changed about 3 months after I moved in. The house was old, built in the 1920s, according to the property records, but it had been well maintained. New roof, updated electrical, a furnace that actually worked. The previous owners had lived there for 40 years before the husband passed away and the wife moved to be closer to her grandchildren. They'd left some furniture behind, things too heavy or too sentimental to take. A dining room table, a grandfather clock in the hallway, a rocking chair on the front porch that creaked when the wind blew. I kept it all. It made the place feel lived in, less empty. I work as a technical writer for a software company, fully remote, which means I can do my job from anywhere with an internet connection. The farmhouse had decent Wi-Fi, not great, but good enough, and the isolation meant I could focus without distractions. No traffic noise, no neighbors playing music at 2 a.m., no sirens or construction, or any of the sounds that had made my apartment in Portland feel like living inside a machine. Just quiet, just the wind in the trees and the rain on the windows and the occasional call of birds I was still learning to identify. I was happy there, genuinely happy, in a way I hadn't been in years. The first time it happened was in late October. A big storm had rolled in from the coast, the kind that turns the sky green and makes the trees bend sideways. I'd spent the day working, eaten dinner while watching the lightning flash over the fields, gone to bed early with a book. The rain was hammering against the windows, a constant roar that drowned out everything else. I remember thinking how cozy it felt. Warm bed, good book, storm raging safely outside. Then I heard the whispering. At first I thought it was just the wind. The house had its quirks. Drafts that crept under doors, windows that rattled in their frames, the way old houses do. Sound played tricks in a place like this. The wind could sound like voices if you listened too hard. That's what I told myself as I set down my book and strained to hear. But it wasn't the wind. The more I listened, the more certain I became. There were voices outside my window. Multiple voices, low and urgent, speaking in a rhythm that almost sounded like words. I couldn't make out what they were saying. The rain was too loud, the glass too thick, but the cadence was unmistakable. Human speech. Right outside my bedroom, on the second floor, where no one could possibly be standing. I got out of bed. My heart was beating faster than I wanted to admit. I crossed to the window and looked out into the storm. Nothing, just rain and darkness and the vague shapes of trees thrashing in the wind. The backfield stretched out below me, a flat expanse of mud and dead grass, empty as far as I could see. No one there. No one anywhere. The whispering stopped. I stood at the window for a long time, watching the storm, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Tired brain, active imagination, the kind of auditory pareidolia that makes people hear their name in white noise. I went back to bed. I finished my book. I fell asleep. But I didn't forget. The next storm came 4 days later. Smaller this time. Just a steady rain that started around sunset and continued through the night. I was in my office on the first floor, finishing up a project when I heard it again, whispering, coming from the window behind my desk. I spun around in my chair. The window looked out onto the side yard, a narrow strip of grass between the house and the old barn I used for storage. Rain streaked down the glass, blurring the view, but I could see the barn, the fence line, the dark mass of trees beyond. No one there. But the whispering continued, louder now, closer. I could almost make out individual voices, 2, maybe 3, overlapping like people talking over each other. The words were still unclear, muffled by the glass and the rain, but I caught fragments, syllables that might have been names, sounds that might have been questions. I stood up, walked to the window, pressed my palm against the cold glass. The whispering stopped instantly. Silence, just the rain, steady and ordinary, just my own breathing, too fast, too shallow. I stood there with my hand on the window, staring out into the wet darkness, and I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a child. I felt watched. The sensation was overwhelming, a prickle at the back of my neck, a weight in my stomach, the absolute certainty that something was looking at me. I scanned the yard, the barn, the tree line. Nothing moved. Nothing was there. But something was there. I could feel it. Multiple somethings, standing just out of sight, waiting in the rain. I closed the curtains, turned on every light in the house, told myself I was being ridiculous, letting isolation and bad weather get to my head. I'd moved from a city of 500,000 people to a farmhouse where my nearest neighbor was a quarter mile away. Of course I was jumpy. Of course my brain was inventing threats to fill the silence. But when I finally went to bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling. And when I woke up the next morning, I found something that made my blood run cold. Footprints. In the mud beneath my office window. Multiple sets, overlapping, pressed deep into the wet earth. They led from the tree line to the house and back again, a path worn by what looked like several people, walking back and forth over and over. Standing outside my window in the rain, watching me work. I called the police that morning. The deputy who came out was a tired-looking man in his 50s who clearly thought I was wasting his time. He looked at the footprints, took a few photos with his phone, asked if I'd had any conflicts with neighbors or seen any strangers in the area. I told him no. He nodded, said it was probably kids from town messing around, said he'd have patrol drive by a few extra times over the next week. Then he left. I stood in the yard after he was gone, staring at those footprints. They weren't from kids messing around. The impressions were too deep, too deliberate. And there were so many of them. Dozens of prints layered on top of each other like whoever made them had stood there for hours, walking back and forth, in the pouring rain, in the dark, right outside my window. Why? What were they looking at? What did they want? I bought security cameras that afternoon, 4 of them, 1 for each side of the house, with motion sensors and night vision and cloud storage that would save the footage even if something happened to the cameras themselves. I spent the rest of the day installing them, drilling holes, running cables, testing angles. By sunset, every approach to the house was covered. If anyone came near my windows again, I'd see them. 3 days passed without rain, clear skies, cold nights, the kind of crisp autumn weather that made the valley look like a postcard. I started to relax, started to think that maybe the deputy was right, that it was just kids, that the whispering had been wind and imagination and nothing more. Then the rain came back. It started around midnight, a slow drizzle that built into a steady downpour over the course of an hour. I was in bed, half asleep, when I heard it. Whispering. I sat up immediately. My bedroom window faced the back field, the same window where I'd heard voices the first night. The rain was loud against the glass, a white noise that should have drowned out everything else. But underneath it, threading through the static, I could hear them, voices, low and urgent, closer than before. I grabbed my phone, Opened the security app. The camera on the back of the house showed the field in grainy green night vision. Rain streaking across the lens, grass bending in the wind. Nothing else. No figures, no movement. Just empty darkness and the whispering that wouldn't stop. I switched to the side cameras. The front camera. All of them showed the same thing. Nothing. No one. But the whispering continued, and now I could hear it from multiple directions. The back window, the side window, the window on the far wall that looked out toward the barn. They were surrounding the house. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the middle of my bedroom with every light on, watching the camera feeds on my phone, listening to voices I couldn't see. The whispering rose and fell in waves, sometimes so quiet I could almost convince myself it was just the rain, sometimes so loud it seemed to come from inside the walls. I caught words, or what sounded like words, my name, a question repeated over and over, something that might have been, "Let us in." At 4:47 a.m., the rain stopped. The whispering stopped with it, cut off mid-syllable like someone had flipped a switch. I sat in the sudden silence, shaking, watching the gray light of dawn creep across the fields. When the sun was fully up, I went outside to check. Footprints everywhere, around the entire house, concentrated beneath every window. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, the mud churned into a thick paste by what must have been dozens of feet. They circled the house in overlapping paths, worn deep like animal tracks around a watering hole. And they were different sizes, some large, some small, some barely bigger than a child's. I photographed everything, sent the pictures to the deputy. He called me back an hour later, sounding less dismissive than before. "That's a lot of prints," he admitted. "You sure you didn't hear any vehicles? Anyone could have driven up your road." "I would have seen headlights. I would have heard an engine, and my cameras didn't catch anything." A pause. "Your cameras didn't catch anything?" "Nothing. Just rain." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was careful. "Listen, I'm going to be honest with you. This is unusual. We've had some reports over the years. People on the outskirts of town, isolated properties like yours, but nothing this extensive. I'll send someone out to take proper casts of those prints, see if we can identify anything. In the meantime, do you have somewhere else you can stay? This is my home." "I understand that, but until we figure out what's going on, I'm not leaving." I don't know why I was so stubborn about it. Pride, maybe. Or the irrational fear that if I left, I'd be admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. That something was wrong with the house. That something was wrong with me. That the whispers were real, and the footprints were real, and I was being watched by something that didn't show up on cameras. The deputy sighed. "All right, just keep your doors locked. Call us if anything else happens." Something else happened 3 nights later. The storm rolled in around 10 p.m., a big one, the kind that knocked out power lines and flooded roads. I was ready this time. Flashlights charged, phone battery full, security cameras on backup power. I sat in my living room with the curtains drawn, watching the feeds on my laptop, waiting. The whispering started at 11:23. I watched the cameras. Nothing. The rain obscured the lenses, turned the night vision into a blur of static and water droplets, but I could see enough to know that no one was there. The fields were empty. The yard was empty. The footprints from before had been washed away by days of sun and wind, and no new ones appeared. But the whispering grew louder, closer. I could hear individual voices now, 3, 4, maybe more, speaking over each other in a language I couldn't identify. Not English, not anything I recognized, just sounds, syllables, a rhythm that rose and fell like chanting. Then one of the voices separated from the others. Clear, distinct, speaking directly into my ear. "We've been waiting so long." I screamed, leaped off the couch, spun around, certain someone was standing right behind me. The room was empty, but the voice continued, coming from everywhere and nowhere, intimate and close. Every storm we come back, every storm we wait, and now you're here. Finally, someone who can hear us. The other voices joined in, a chorus of whispers that filled the house like water, seeping through the walls, through the floor, through my skin. Let us in, let us in, let us in. I ran, grabbed my keys, threw open the front door, sprinted through the rain to my car. The whispers followed me, surrounded me, but I didn't stop. I started the engine and tore down the gravel drive without looking back. In my rearview mirror, illuminated by my taillights, I saw them for the first time. Figures, standing in the rain. Dozens of them, lining both sides of the driveway, watching me go. I couldn't see their faces. I didn't want to. I drove until the rain stopped. It took almost 2 hours, south on country roads, then onto the highway, then into a town I'd never been to before. I found a motel with a blinking vacancy sign and paid cash for a room. I sat on the bed with the lights on and the TV playing something I didn't watch, and I waited for morning. The whispers didn't follow me. Whatever they were, they stayed at the house, stayed in the rain. I should have kept driving, should have gone back to Portland, back to my old life, back to anywhere that wasn't the farmhouse on Vickers Road. But I'd put everything into that property. My savings, my plans, my dream of a quiet life in the country. I wasn't ready to give it up, not without understanding what I was running from. The next day, I went to the county records office. It was a small building attached to the courthouse in town. Dusty shelves, ancient filing cabinets. A clerk who looked like she'd been there since the building was constructed. I told her I was researching the history of my property, that I was curious about previous owners. She pointed me to a section of property records and left me to it. The house on Vickers Road had changed hands 7 times since it was built in 1923. The original owners were a family named Hollister, a husband, wife, and 3 children. They'd lived there for 12 years before selling to a couple from California. After that, the ownership became sporadic. 5 years here, 8 years there. One family stayed for almost 2 decades. Another lasted less than a year. I made a list of names and dates, then moved to the newspaper archives. It took hours to find what I was looking for. The papers were on microfiche, grainy and hard to read, organized by year and month. I started with 1935, the year the Hollisters sold the property, and worked backward. I found the article in the August 1934 edition. Tragedy strikes local family. The headline was small, buried on the 3rd page, the kind of story that might have been front-page news in a bigger city, but got lost in the shuffle of a small-town paper. I leaned closer to the screen, reading slowly, my heart sinking with every word. On the night of August 17, 1934, during a severe thunderstorm, the Hollister family had taken in a group of travelers seeking shelter. The travelers, described only as a party of approximately 12 individuals, had been passing through the area on foot when the storm hit. The Hollisters, being Christian folk, had offered them a place to stay until the weather cleared. None of the travelers were ever seen again. According to the article, the Hollisters claimed that the travelers had left during the night, sometime after the storm passed, but neighbors reported seeing the group enter the property and never seeing them leave. A search was conducted. Nothing was found. No bodies, no belongings, no evidence that the travelers had existed at all. The case was eventually closed, the travelers classified as transients who had simply moved on, but the Hollisters sold the property 6 months later, moved to another state, never spoke of the incident again. I sat back from the microfiche reader, a cold weight settling in my stomach. 12 travelers, seeking shelter from a storm, vanished without a trace from the house where I now lived. I kept searching, found more references scattered across decades of local history. In 1952, A woman living at the property reported hearing voices outside her windows during rainstorms. She was dismissed as hysterical. In 1967, the owners at the time hired a priest to bless the house after their children complained about people in the yard who only appeared when it rained. In 1989, a family moved out after less than 6 months. The husband told neighbors he'd seen figures standing in the fields during a storm, figures that disappeared when the lightning flashed. The same story, over and over, the same whispers, the same watchers, spanning almost 90 years. I drove back to the farmhouse the next morning. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe that knowledge would give me power. That understanding the history would somehow break the pattern. The sun was out, the sky clear, and in the daylight the property looked peaceful. Just an old house on a quiet road, surrounded by fields and trees and nothing sinister at all. I spent the afternoon walking the land. The property was larger than I'd realized, almost 40 acres, most of it overgrown fields that hadn't been farmed in decades. I walked the perimeter, following old fence lines half buried in weeds, looking for anything unusual. I found the remains of a root cellar near the tree line. Its stone walls collapsed inward. I found a rusted tractor in the backfield, so old that trees were growing through its engine. I found a clearing near the north edge of the property, hidden behind a thick stand of oaks. And in the clearing, I found the graves. There were no headstones, no markers of any kind. Just 12 shallow depressions in the earth, arranged in a rough circle, each one about the size of a human body. Grass and weeds had grown over them, decades of vegetation obscuring what lay beneath, but the shapes were unmistakable. 12 graves, 12 travelers. The Hollisters hadn't let them leave. The Hollisters had made sure they never could. I stood in that clearing as the afternoon light faded, staring at those shallow depressions, and I understood. The travelers had come seeking shelter, and they'd found something else instead. They'd been killed, buried in unmarked graves, left to rot in a field far from anyone who might have known or cared. And now, every time the rain fell, every time the conditions matched that August night in 1934, they came back, not to haunt, not to terrorize, to ask for help. "Let us in," they'd whispered, not a threat, a plea. They wanted someone to acknowledge them, to find them, to know what had happened. They'd been waiting for 90 years, and now I was the one who could finally hear them. The sky had darkened while I stood there. I looked up and saw clouds rolling in from the west, thick and gray and heavy with rain. A storm was coming, and this time I wasn't going to run. The rain started just after sunset. I was ready. I'd spent the last hour of daylight preparing, candles in every room, a flashlight in my pocket, my phone fully charged. I'd also brought something else, a shovel from the barn and a bag of small white stones I'd found in the garden shed. I didn't know if it would matter. I didn't know if any of this would work, but I had to try. The first drops hit the windows around 7 p.m., gentle at first, almost hesitant. Then the sky opened up, and the rain came down in sheets, hammering the roof with a sound like applause. I stood in my living room with the curtains open, watching the darkness beyond the glass, waiting. The whispers began at 7:43. They were different this time, softer, less urgent. I could still hear the words threading through the rain, my name, questions, please, but the desperation had faded. They knew I was listening. They knew I wasn't afraid anymore. I opened the front door. Rain swept across the porch, cold and sharp against my skin. The wind carried the whispers directly to me now, no glass to muffle them, no walls to block the sound. I could hear them clearly for the first time. Voices layered over voices, men and women and what might have been children, all speaking at once in a chorus of need. "You found us. Finally, someone found us. Will you help us, please? We've been here so long." I stepped off the porch and into the storm. The rain soaked me instantly, plastering my clothes to my skin, running into my eyes. I wiped my face and looked around. The yard was dark, the security lights overwhelmed by the downpour, but I could see them now. Figures standing at the edge of visibility, dozens of them arranged in a loose circle around the house, exactly where the footprints had been. They didn't move toward me. They just stood there, watching, waiting. "I know what happened to you," I said, raising my voice above the rain. "I found the article. I found your graves." The whispers surged, a wave of sound that crashed over me, filled with relief and grief and something that might have been hope. "The family," one voice said, clearer than the others. A woman's voice, tired and sad. "They seemed so kind. They offered us shelter, food, a place to rest. We trusted them, a man this time, his voice rough with old anger. We had no reason not to." "What happened?" I asked. The whispers fell silent. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain, the wind, the distant rumble of thunder rolling across the valley. Then the woman spoke again. "They waited until we were asleep, all of us in the barn, grateful for a roof over our heads. We never woke up." A pause. "We never got to wake up." I thought of the root cellar I'd found. Its walls collapsed. I thought of the tools that might have been stored there, the things a farming family would have access to, the things they might have used. "Why?" I whispered. "Why did they do it?" "We were strangers." The man's voice was bitter. "Passing through. No one knew us. No one would miss us." He paused. "We had money. Not much, but enough. They took it, took everything. Then they buried us in the field like we were nothing." "We've been trying to tell someone," the woman continued. "Every storm, when the veil is thin, we come back. We stand at the windows. We call out. But no one ever hears us. No one until you." I felt tears on my face, mixing with the rain. 90 years. 90 years of watching people come and go, of whispering into the darkness, of waiting for someone to listen. The terror I'd felt seemed so small now, so insignificant compared to their suffering. "I hear you," I said. "I see you. And I'm going to help." The figures shifted, drew closer. I could see them more clearly now, not solid, not quite, but more defined than before. Men in old-fashioned clothes, women in long dresses, children clutching at their parents' hands. Their faces were pale, worn, but not frightening, just sad. Impossibly, endlessly sad. "How?" the woman asked. "We've tried to leave. We've tried to rest. But something holds us here. Something in the ground." "Your bodies," I said. "You were never found, never given proper burials. That's what's keeping you here." Silence. Then a ripple of whispers, voices conferring with each other, too quiet for me to hear. "If we were found," the man said slowly, "if someone knew what happened to us, you could rest." Another silence. The rain was beginning to ease, the thunder moving off to the east. I knew I didn't have much time. When the storm passed, they would fade, and I'd have to wait for the next rain, the next chance. "There's a clearing near the north edge of the property," I said quickly. "I saw the depressions in the earth. I know where you're buried. Tomorrow, I'm going to call the police. I'm going to tell them what I found, what I suspect. They'll excavate. They'll identify you if they can. And then," I swallowed, "then everyone will know. You won't be forgotten anymore." The woman stepped forward. She was close enough now that I could see her face clearly, young, maybe 30, with dark hair plastered to her cheeks and eyes that held more gratitude than I'd ever seen. "You would do that for us? You've been waiting long enough." She smiled. It was the saddest, most beautiful smile I'd ever seen. "We didn't mean to frighten you," she said. "We just wanted to be heard. We've been so alone for so long. You're not alone anymore." The rain slowed to a drizzle. The thunder faded to a distant murmur. All around me, the figures began to blur, their edges softening, their forms growing transparent. "Wait," I said. "Will you come back when it rains again?" The woman was barely visible now, a shimmer of light in the darkness. "We'll come back," she said, "until it's finished, until we can finally rest." And then they were gone. All of them vanished into the night like they'd never been there at all. I stood alone in the dying rain, soaked to the bone, shivering with cold and something that felt almost like hope. I had work to do. The police didn't believe me at first. I'd expected that. I called the sheriff's department the next morning and told them I'd found what I believed to be unmarked graves on my property. I told them about the newspaper article, the missing travelers, the Hollister family's sudden departure. I left out the whispers, the figures, the conversations in the rain. I knew how that would sound. The deputy who took my call was skeptical but professional. He said he'd send someone out to take a look, that they'd assess the situation and determine if further investigation was warranted. His tone suggested he thought I was wasting his time. But he came, and when he stood in that clearing, looking at those 12 depressions in the earth, something in his face changed. "These could be anything," he said, but his voice had lost its dismissive edge. "Animal burrows, old root systems. They're arranged in a circle. They're all the same size, and there are exactly 12 of them." I handed him a printout of the newspaper article. 12 travelers went missing from this property in 1934. Their bodies were never found. He read the article slowly, his jaw tightening. When he looked up, his eyes moved across the clearing with a different kind of attention. "I'll need to make some calls," he said. The excavation began 4 days later. They brought ground-penetrating radar first, scanning the clearing in a grid pattern. I watched from the edge of the trees as technicians in reflective vests studied their monitors, marking spots in the earth with small orange flags. One by one, the flags appeared, 12 of them, spaced evenly around the clearing, exactly where the depressions were. The digging started the next morning. A forensic team from the state police, accompanied by an archaeologist from the university. They worked carefully, methodically, brushing away layers of soil with tools that looked more suited to a museum than a crime scene. I stayed out of their way, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. They found the first body just before noon. I wasn't there when they uncovered it. They'd asked me to wait at the house, but I saw the change in the investigators when they came to tell me. The skepticism was gone. In its place was something quieter, heavier, the weight of confirmed tragedy. Over the next 3 days, they found all 12. The remains were badly deteriorated. 90 years in the ground had reduced them to bones and fragments, but there was enough to tell the story. Blunt force trauma to the skulls, defensive wounds on the arms and hands, people who had fought back, who had tried to survive, who had been overpowered anyway. They found other things too. A woman's wedding ring, a child's leather shoe, a pocket watch with an inscription in a language the investigators didn't recognize. Small, personal items that had survived the decades, waiting to be discovered. The Hollister family was long dead. All of them passed away decades ago without ever facing justice for what they'd done. There would be no trial, no conviction, no punishment, but there would be acknowledgement. The remains were identified through historical records and DNA analysis where possible. The travelers had been a group of Romani families passing through Oregon on their way north. They had names now, histories, people who had loved them and lost them and never known what happened. The story made the news. A small piece at first, buried in the local section, but it spread. The tragedy resonated, Innocent people seeking shelter, murdered by those who offered it, buried in secret for nearly a century. Journalists came to interview me. I told them about the property records, the newspaper archive, the clearing I'd stumbled upon during a walk. I didn't tell them about the rain. Some things aren't meant to be explained. The last storm came in early December. I'd been waiting for it, watching the forecasts, tracking the weather patterns moving in from the coast. When the clouds finally gathered and the first drops began to fall, I was ready. I walked out onto the porch and sat in the old rocking chair the previous owners had left behind, and I listened to the rain. The whispers came softly this time. Not urgent, not desperate. Just voices, murmuring at the edge of hearing, blending with the sound of water on the roof. You kept your promise. I looked up. They were standing in the yard, all 12 of them, more visible than they'd ever been. Not shadowy figures this time, but people. Clear and distinct, their faces illuminated by some light I couldn't see. The woman who had spoken to me before stood at the front, her dark hair dry despite the downpour, her sad eyes finally at peace. They know what happened now, I said. Everyone knows. We felt it. The man who had spoken of anger stood beside her, his expression softened. When they found us, when they spoke our names, we felt it. Are you? I hesitated. Can you rest now? The woman smiled, that same sad, beautiful smile I remembered from our last conversation. Almost, she said. There's one more thing. What? She stepped forward, and for the first time she touched me, her hand on my shoulder, light and cool as the rain itself. Thank you. We waited so long for someone to hear us. So many people lived in this house, and none of them listened. But you did. You didn't run away forever. You came back. You found us. I felt tears on my cheeks again. I'm sorry it took so long. It doesn't matter now. Time doesn't matter, not where we're going. She squeezed my shoulder gently. Be happy here. This is a good house. It was always a good house. It just had a terrible secret, and now the secret is out. She stepped back. Around her, the other figures were beginning to fade, their forms softening, dissolving into the rain. Will I see you again? I asked. No. Her voice was distant now, barely audible over the storm. We won't need to come back anymore, but we'll remember you. Wherever we go, we'll remember the one who finally heard us. And then they were gone. The rain continued for another hour. I sat on the porch the whole time, rocking gently in the old chair, listening to the waterfall. It sounded different now, cleaner, just rain, nothing more. That was 8 months ago. I still live in the farmhouse on Vickers Road. The property is quiet now, no whispers, no footprints, no figures in the storm. The clearing where they were buried has been marked with a small memorial, funded by donations from people who read the story and wanted to help. 12 names carved in granite, finally acknowledged, finally remembered. Sometimes, when the rain falls heavy and the night is dark, I still go out to the porch. I sit in the rocking chair and I listen, just in case. But there's nothing there anymore. Just the wind in the trees and the water on the roof, and the deep, settled peace of a house that's finally free of its ghosts. I used to love the rain. I still do. But for different reasons now. Every storm reminds me that some things are worth waiting for, that some voices, no matter how long they've been silent, deserve to be heard, and that sometimes the scariest thing isn't the whisper in the dark. It's the silence that comes when no one listens.